Welcome back, legends, and if you're new here, welcome. This channel is all about powerful Harry Potter what if stories, where we explore alternate destinies, hidden power awakenings, and the darker secrets of the wizarding world. Quick note before we begin. This video is self-recorded and created in line with YouTube's latest policies. Every story here is originally written, creatively edited, and made purely for storytelling and entertainment. What if 7-year-old Harry Potter awakened as a Metamorphmagus and escaped the Dursleys forever? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, make sure to subscribe. Now, let's begin.
Chapter 1. The Crack in the Cupboard. The darkness in the cupboard under the stairs had a texture. It wasn't just an absence of light. It was a thick, dusty thing that settled in Harry's lungs and made his ribs feel too tight for his skin. He knew every splinter of the top step above his head, every groan of the house settling around him like a giant, sleeping beast. He knew the exact number of breaths it took to fog the air in front of his face before dawn's gray light would seep under the door, 537. Tonight, the number wouldn't come. A cold was sitting in his chest, left over from a week of weeding Aunt Petunia's flower beds in the November rain. His blanket was thin, a frayed thing that smelled of dust and old potatoes. Dudley's broken action figures, discarded and forgotten, watched him from the shelf with painted, sightless eyes. But it wasn't the cold, or the dark, or even the familiar, hollow ache in his stomach that was different. It was the quiet, a quiet so deep it hummed. He'd had another bad dream. Flashes of green light, a high, cold laugh that seemed to freeze his blood, and a feeling of falling endlessly. The scar on his forehead, usually just a faint, itchy line, was burning. A sharp, insistent pulse, right between his eyes. He squeezed them shut, trying to push the pain away. Don't make a sound. Don't make a sound, or Uncle Vernon will be angry. The pain grew. It wasn't just in his head anymore. It was spreading, a wildfire under his skin, crackling down his spine, into his fingertips. He bit his lip until he tasted copper, his small fists clenched in the blanket. I want to be somewhere else. I want to be small. I want to be invisible. I want to be anything but here. The hum in the quiet became a roar in his ears. A sensation, utterly alien, erupted from his core. It wasn't magic as a child might imagine it, no sparkles, no wands. This was a raw, tectonic shifting from the inside out. His bones didn't break, but they sang. A high, clear note of pure potential. His skin prickled, not with goosebumps, but as if every pore was waking up, making decisions. The burning in his scar crested, and with a silent, internal scream, something gave way. The pain vanished. So did the cold. Harry opened his eyes. The darkness was no longer thick. It was clear, sharp, detailed. He could see the grain of the wood, the weave of the blanket, as if someone had turned on a light no one else could see. He sat up, and his head didn't brush the sloping ceiling. Confused, he raised a hand to his face. His fingers touched skin, but it felt wrong. Smoother. His hair, usually a stubborn, ragged mess, fell sleek and straight against his cheeks. He scrambled out of his cot, moving with a lightness that was unfamiliar. His two big hand-me-down clothes hung on him differently, pooling around smaller limbs. He stumbled to the small, tarnished piece of metal Aunt Petunia had nailed to the wall as a mirror. In the gloom, his reflection was a ghostly smudge. He needed light. The desire was instant, frantic. Light. Let me see. As if answering his thought, a gentle, pearly luminescence bloomed from his own skin. Not a glow around him, but from within, soft as moonlight, illuminating the cramped space. Harry stared into the metal mirror. A stranger stared back. The face was narrower, elfin. The famous lightning bolt scar was gone, vanished without a trace. His eyes, once his mother's bright green, were a calm, gray blue. His hair was a shade of mousy brown, falling in soft waves. He was smaller, thinner, a completely different boy. A wild, bird-like thrill shot through him. It's not me. He focused on the reflection, on the boy he knew he was supposed to be. The messy black hair, the green eyes, the scar. That's me. Put it back. The tingling surged again, less painful this time, more like a shiver. The skin on his face rippled, a bizarre, fluid sensation. In the mirror, the mousy-haired boy melted away. His features swam like oil on water, and then solidified. Black hair, stubborn and messy. Green eyes, wide with shock. The jagged scar reappeared on his forehead, stark and familiar. He had changed it back. He could change himself. The realization didn't come in words. It was a deep, instinctual knowing, settling into his 7-year-old bones with absolute certainty. This was his, a secret power, a way out of the darkness. He let the light under his skin fade, plunging the cupboard back into near blackness. But it didn't feel dark anymore. It felt like a cocoon. For the first time in his memory, Harry Potter smiled in the cupboard. It was a small, fierce thing. The next morning, the bolt on the cupboard door screeched open at the usual time. Aunt Petunia's horse-like face peered in, her lips already pursed for the daily orders. Up, get the bacon on, and don't you dare let it burn. She stopped. Her eyes, small and pale, swept over him. He was kneeling, making his cot neat, dressed in Dudley's old oversized clothes. He looked just as he always did. But something made her pause. A flicker in his eyes when he glanced up. A stillness that wasn't his usual nervous scurrying. Wipe that look off your face, she snapped, but the command was hollow, uncertain. Yes, Aunt Petunia, he said, his voice the same soft, polite tone. But inside, something was singing. You don't see me. Not really. You never have. He cooked the breakfast, moving with careful precision. He felt Uncle Vernon's glare on his back, heavy as a physical weight. He listened to Dudley's grunts and complaints, the clatter of cutlery on plates. It was all the same. And yet, it was all different. He was a secret, a stone in a stream, watching the water rush by. He could feel the new power sleeping under his skin, a coiled spring. He practiced in tiny, invisible ways. As he scrubbed a pan, he willed the color of a single freckle on his wrist to fade away. It did. As he took out the trash, he made the tip of his ear a little pointier, just for a second. The thrill was electric. He wasn't just Harry in the cupboard anymore. He was Harry who could be anyone. The climax came days later, over something brutally small. A single, dried pea. He'd been cleaning the kitchen floor. Dudley had, accidentally, knocked over a bowl of leftover mushy peas. Harry was on his knees, scrubbing the linoleum, when he found it. One pea, dried and hardened, hiding under the lip of the cabinet. He missed it on the first pass. Uncle Vernon, finishing his after-dinner whiskey, saw it. Lazy, he roared, his face purpling. Filthy, worthless boy, can't even clean a floor properly. Harry flinched, the old, automatic fear surging. I'm sorry, all. Sorry isn't good enough. Spittle flew from Uncle Vernon's mustache. No supper. A week in your cupboard. And you can clean this floor again, properly, on your hands and knees until I'm satisfied. A week. For a dried pea. The injustice of it, the sheer, monstrous pettiness, didn't just hurt. It ignited something. The power under his skin didn't sing this time. It snarled. He didn't mean to do it. It erupted from the core of his anger, a silent, defiant scream. Uncle Vernon's face, looming over him, began to change. His small, piggy eyes widened further, the irises darkening to little black beads. His nose twitched, flattening, the nostrils flaring into two moist, pink holes. His teeth, yellowed and stained, seemed to grow more prominent, pushing his lips out. Patches of coarse, bristly hair sprouted from his ears and on the backs of his thick hands. He wasn't a full pig. He was a monstrous, man-shaped thing with the snarling, brutish features of a boar. Aunt Petunia, entering with a drying cloth, shrieked. A high, piercing sound of pure terror. She dropped the plate she was holding. It shattered on the freshly cleaned floor. Dudley started bawling. Daddy, your face. Uncle Vernon staggered back, his hands flying to his features. He felt the bristles, the new shape of his snout. He let out a confused, guttural grunt that was more animal than human. His furious, bewildered eyes locked onto Harry, who was still kneeling on the floor, his own heart hammering against his ribs. He knew. Somehow, in his animalistic rage, he knew. You. He grunted, the word slurred and wet. You did this. Terror, cold and clean, washed over Harry. This was worse than a beating. This was magic. This was the forbidden thing, the freakishness they hated most. And he had done it in the open. Uncle Vernon took a heavy, threatening step forward, his boar-like face a mask of murderous fury. Aunt Petunia was still screaming, clutching at Dudley. Harry didn't think. He willed. The world blurred. His body was a rush of liquid sensation. Bones lightened, Muscles rewrote their purpose, skin became a canvas. He didn't pick a form. He pleaded with the power inside him, away. Small. Gone. When Uncle Vernon's meaty, bristly hand swiped through the air where Harry's head had been, he caught nothing. A small, sleek, black cat with startlingly green eyes hit the linoleum with a soft thud. It darted between Uncle Vernon's tree trunk legs, a shadow of panic. Aunt Petunia's screams reached a new, hysterical pitch. Animal. Freak. Harry the cat didn't look back. He shot towards the kitchen door, still slightly ajar from Petunia's entrance. He slipped through the gap just as Uncle Vernon's fist came down, smashing a chair to splinters. He was in the hall. The front door was there, solid and locked with bolts and chains. But the cat flapped. The small, stiff plastic door for Aunt Marge's horrible terrier, Ripper. He hurled his small feline body at it. It gave with a thwack. He tumbled out into the cold, damp night of Privet Drive, rolling onto the neat, manicured lawn. Freedom was a blast of icy air in his lungs. He scrambled to his paws, his cat heart beating a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He looked back at the house. The kitchen light was blazing. He could see the huge, distorted shadow of Uncle Vernon thrashing about, hear the muffled roars and screams. They would come for him. They would call the police, the army, anyone. They would find the freak and lock him away forever. The transformation shuddered through him again, uncomfortable, forced by fear and exhaustion. He was a small, skinny, 7-year-old boy again, crouched on the wet grass in Dudley's outsized pajamas. The night air bit through the thin fabric. He had nowhere to go. No money. No friends. The world was vast, dark, and terrifying. But he was out. He looked at the house one last time, at the warm, yellow windows that had never held warmth for him. He saw Uncle Vernon's silhouette, now mostly human again but still twisted with rage, yank open the back door. Harry turned and ran. He didn't stop. He ran past the identical hedges, the parked cars, the silent, staring houses. He ran until his lungs burned and his bare feet were cut and numb on the pavement. He ran until Privet Drive was swallowed by the darkness behind him. He collapsed finally in a damp, brick-lined alleyway behind a row of shops, the smell of rotting garbage thick in the air. He curled into a ball, shivering violently, his breath coming in ragged sobs. He was free. He was alone. He was a freak with a power he didn't understand. Hunted by the only family he had ever known. But as he lay there, the echo of his own transformation still humming in his veins, one truth burned brighter than the fear, colder than the night. He would never, ever go back. Somewhere in the distance, a clock tower began to chime midnight. Each heavy note seemed to shake the stars above the alley, where a small, lost boy with the power to be anyone clutched his secret to his chest. And began to plan. Chapter 2, The Boy in the Broken Reflections. The chimes of midnight faded, swallowed by the city's constant, low growl. In the alley, the cold was no longer just air, it was a living thing, seeping through the thin cotton of Dudley's old pajamas and settling deep into Harry's bones. His feet, scratched and filthy from his barefoot run, throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. He was a small heap against the rough brick, trying to make himself even smaller. Every distant car engine was Uncle Vernon's company car. Every shout from a far-off pub was his roar. The panic was a wild animal trapped in his chest, scrambling his thoughts. They'll find me. They'll call the police. They'll tell them I'm a freak, a thief, a runaway. They'll lock me away. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to push the images away. But all he saw was Uncle Vernon's face, morphing into that boar-like snout, the pure, murderous hatred in his eyes. That look hadn't been about a dried pea. It had been about what Harry was. And now they all knew. A sob hitched in his throat, but he choked it back. Crying made noise. Noise got you found. He had to think. The power, the changing, it had gotten him out. Could it hide him? Tentatively, like poking a sore tooth, he focused on the feeling. That liquid, shifting sensation under his skin. It was still there, a quiet pool of strange energy, tired but waiting. He remembered the cat. The freedom of being small, fast, unnoticed. He couldn't stay a boy in pajamas. That was the first thing they'd look for. With a grimace of concentration, he pictured the cat again. The sleek fur, the 4 quick legs, the tail for balance. The power stirred, sluggish. His skin prickled unpleasantly, a crawling, stretching feeling. Bones popped with soft, internal clicks. The world swam, tilting, colors blurring and sharpening into different shades. The smell of the garbage exploded in his nostrils, rotten meat, sour milk, a universe of stench. Sounds became sharper, closer, the scuttle of insects in the wall, the drip of water from a broken pipe 3 alleys over. He looked down. 2 small, black paws, not hands, rested on the wet pavement. He'd done it. But the exhaustion was deeper now, a hollowed-out feeling in his feline stomach. Magic, it seemed, needed fuel he didn't have. The cat body was warmer, at least. The fur was a thin barrier against the cold, but better than cotton. He padded to the mouth of the alley, peering out with wide, green-slitted eyes. Little Whinging was asleep. Neat, dark houses, empty streets washed in the orange glow of sodium lights. It was a world of straight lines and locked doors, and he was now permanently outside of it. He had to get further away. Much further. Staying close to the shadows, a small black smudge against the night, he began to move. He traveled along garden fences, under parked cars, through gaps in hedges. The world from a foot off the ground was vast and full of peril. A gust of wind was a gale. A rolling tin can was a boulder. He found a main road, wider, busier even at this hour. Headlights swept past like predatory eyes. The noise of engines was a terrifying roar. He crouched under a bus stop bench, watching. People hurried past, coats pulled tight, never looking down. No one saw the cat. A new, fragile hope sparked. If I can be a cat, I can be anything. I can be invisible. But hunger was a sharp, gnawing knot in his belly. Cat instincts yearned for the rustle of a mouse in the grass, the taste of raw, warm meat. Boy memory craved toast, baked beans, anything that wasn't stale leftovers. He pushed on, driven by fear and a dawning, desperate plan. He needed a place to hide, to rest, to think. He needed a nest. Hours later, as the sky began to lighten from black to a bruised gray, he found it. Or rather, he smelled it. The damp, mineral scent of earth and stagnant water, cut through with the sharp, clean odor of pine trees. A wood, on the edge of a park at the town's boundary. He slipped through a broken section of wrought iron fencing, his tail low. The woods were a different kind of dark, deeper and softer than the alley. The trees were tall, silent sentinels. It was scary, but it was a natural scary. It wasn't a Dursley scary. He found a place under the thick, spreading roots of a giant oak. The earth was dry, sheltered by a tangle of brambles. It was a cave just big enough for a small cat. He crawled in, his body screaming for rest. The second he curled up, tucking his nose under his tail, a sleep heavier than any cupboard darkness pulled him under. He woke to the sound of birdsong and a slice of weak, wintry sunlight cutting through the brambles. For one blissful second, he was just warm. Then memory crashed back in. He was Harry Potter. He was a freak. He was alone in the woods. The boy's shape returned with a shiver and a sense of wrongness he was starting to get used to. He was still in the pajamas, now damp and filthy. His feet were a mess of cuts and dirt. He was so hungry his vision swam. He had to find food. And clothes. And he had to understand this thing he could do. Cautiously, he peered out of his root cave. The park was empty, frosted grass glittering in the morning sun. In the distance, he could see the rooftops of Little Whinging. A shudder ran through him. Too close. He was still too close. He needed to practice. To control it. Focusing, he held out a grimy hand. He pictured the skin paling, becoming lighter. The tingling came, faint. Slowly, the dirt-streaked skin on the back of his hand lightened a shade, then another, until it was almost milk-white. He let it go, and it seeped back to its normal tone. He tried a finger, making it longer, bonier, like Aunt Petunia's. He changed the color of a single fingernail to a bright, ridiculous pink. A giddy, breathless laugh escaped him. He clamped a hand over his mouth, eyes darting around. He could control it. The next test was bigger. He needed to look different. Not just a tweak, but a whole new boy. He closed his eyes, thinking of the boys he'd seen sometimes from the cupboard window, walking to school with their mothers. Ordinary boys. Nothing special. He focused on his face. The messy black hair. He willed it to be straight, a dishwater blonde. His scar. He concentrated on the feeling of it vanishing, of the skin becoming smooth. His eyes, he changed from green to a plain, unremarkable brown. He thought of his features softening, becoming rounder, less sharp. The transformation washed over him, smoother this time. It felt like pulling on a mask, but the mask was his own flesh. When he opened his eyes, he crawled out to a small, icy puddle formed in a dip in the roots. The reflection was blurry, broken by ripples. But it was enough. A stranger looked back. A plain, mousy-haired, brown-eyed boy. No scar. Nothing remarkable at all. He was nobody. And nobody was safe. A fierce, proud smile touched his new lips. He had his first disguise. Now, food. He stayed in the woods until full dark, practicing small changes, listening to his stomach growl. When the park was long, empty and the moon was high, he transformed back into the cat. The hunger was even sharper, a piercing need. Cat instinct took over, pushing aside boy thoughts. He was a hunter in the dark. He stalked through the undergrowth, every sense screaming. He caught a fat, slow earthworm and ate it without thought, the taste of soil and something alien making his boy mind recoil even as his cat body purred with satisfaction. He drank from an icy stream, lapping carefully. It wasn't enough. He needed real food. He ventured back towards the edges of the town, but not to Privet Drive. He found a row of shops with bins around the back. The smell was overwhelming, decaying vegetables, old grease, sour milk. He nosed at a split black bag, finding a crust of bread hard as rock, half a moldy sausage. His cat self didn't care. He ate what he could, the desperation overshadowing the revulsion. As he slunk away, his ears twitched. A sound from a nearby bin lane, a soft, pained mewling. Curiosity, both feline and human, drew him. Around the corner, in a pool of light from a security bulb, was a cardboard box. Inside, a shivering bundle of ginger fur, a tiny kitten, eyes barely open, was crying pitifully beside the still, cold body of its mother. The sight hit Harry with a physical force. The smallness, the abandonment, the sheer, silent tragedy of it in the cold night. He crept closer. The kitten mewled again, blindly turning its head. It was starving. It would be dead by morning. He couldn't leave it. He didn't know how to be a boy who rescued things. He only knew how to hide, to survive. But looking at this tiny, helpless creature was like looking into a broken mirror. Alone. Thrown away. Carefully, using his teeth as gently as he could, he picked up the ginger kitten by the scruff of its neck. It went limp, instinctively. In his cat mouth, it was a warm, fragile weight. He carried it all the way back to the woods, to the root cave. He set it down on the dry leaves, then shifted back into his boy disguise, the blonde, brown-eyed nobody. His hands were more careful than teeth. He found a relatively clean leaf, curled it, and made several trips to the stream, dripping water onto the kitten's mouth until it swallowed weakly. He had no food for it. He was starving himself. He held the tiny thing against his chest, under the filthy pajama top, sharing what little warmth he had. The kitten's cries subsided into faint, ragged purrs. "It's okay," Harry whispered to it, his voice rough from disuse. "I've got you." The words felt strange in his mouth. He'd never said them to anyone. He wasn't sure if they were true. But as he sat in the dark, holding another lost thing, the crushing loneliness shifted, just a fraction. It wasn't gone. It was now shared. He had a power they feared. He had a face they wouldn't recognize. He had a secret nest in the woods. And now, he had someone to protect. The kitten stirred against his heartbeat. Harry looked down at its small, trusting face, then out through the brambles at the vast, uncaring world. The fear was still there, a cold stone in his gut. But alongside it, something new was kindling. Something hard, and sharp, and determined. He was 7 years old. He was a Metamorphmagus. He was on the run. And his story was only just beginning. The moon passed behind a cloud, plunging the root cave into total darkness. In the silence, broken only by the kitten's soft breathing, Harry made a promise to the night, to the woods, to the tiny life in his hands. "No one," he whispered, the words a vow etched in frost, "is ever going to lock me up again." Outside, the wind picked up, sighing through the pine needles. It carried the distant, fading scent of Privet Drive away on its breath, and the sharp, clean promise of a storm to come. Chapter 3, A Name in the Rain. The kitten didn't die. That fact became the center of Harry's new, strange world. He named it Ember, for the single fleck of bright orange in its otherwise pale ginger fur, and for the tiny, stubborn warmth it gave off against his skin. Its survival felt like a miracle, a sign that maybe not everything he touched was doomed. The woods became their kingdom. Harry, in his unnamed blonde boy disguise, was its secret prince. Ember, growing stronger on stolen milk from doorsteps and mashed up bits of Harry's scavenged food, was his knight, a wobbly-legged guardian of their root cave. But a prince needed provisions. A knight needed armor. And Harry's pajamas were disintegrating. The need for clothes forced his first real foray into the world as a new person. It was a week after his escape. The fear of immediate pursuit had faded, replaced by a constant, low-level vigilance. He'd seen a police car cruise slowly past the park entrance once, but it hadn't stopped. The Dursleys, he reasoned, would be too ashamed, too terrified of the freakishness, to make a big public fuss. They'd probably told the neighbors he'd been sent to a strict boarding school up north. The life felt true, and it gave him a sliver of courage. He chose a charity shop in a part of town he'd never been to, a place of narrower streets and slightly shabbier shops. He waited until a mother with 2 arguing children pushed the door open, then slipped in behind them, a small, silent shadow. The smell inside was overwhelming. Old paper, lavender polish, and the ghost of 1,000 different lives clinging to the donated clothes. Racks of coats stood like a forest of lost seasons. His heart hammered. This was stealing. But staying alive wasn't stealing, a fierce, new voice inside him argued. It was a war. He moved quickly, his small hands flitting over sizes. A gray wool jumper, sleeves too long but thick and warm. A pair of dark corduroy trousers, patched at the knee but sturdy. Socks, mismatched but clean. Underthings, bundled quickly. He found a scuffed pair of trainers, the laces frayed, but they fit over his sore feet like a dream. He even took a worn canvas satchel, stuffing his acquisitions inside. At the back of the shop, near the toys, was a mirror. He caught sight of himself, a pale, wide-eyed blonde stranger in filthy pajamas, clutching a bulging bag. He looked exactly like what he was, a thief. Shame burned his cheeks. He fumbled in the pocket of the pajama bottoms, the ones that had been Dudley's. His fingers closed around 2 cold, hard coins. 50 pence. Forgotten change from some forgotten errand. He didn't think. He walked to the counter where an elderly woman with kind, tired eyes was sorting buttons. He placed the 2 coins on the scratched glass with a soft clink. For the bag, he whispered, not meeting her eyes. She looked at the coins, then at his face, his dirty state. Her gaze softened with a pity that made him want to shrivel. That's very honest of you, dear. Take what you need. It's why we're here. He couldn't bear it. He nodded once, a sharp jerk of his head, and fled the shop, the bell jangling behind him like an alarm. In the seclusion of a public toilet block, he transformed. It was getting easier. The ripple went from his core outwards, a wave of re-knitting flesh. The blonde hair darkened and tufted up. His eyes shifted back to green, the scar reappearing like a familiar friend on his forehead. He shed the pajamas, a dead skin of his old life, and pulled on the new clothes. The corduroys were stiff, the jumper scratchy, but they were his. They didn't smell of Dudley. They smelled of dust and possibility. He bundled the pajamas into a ball and shoved them deep. Into a sanitary bin. A final, silent goodbye to Harry in the cupboard. Back in the woods, dressed, feeling almost human, he faced his next challenge, food that didn't come from bins. His forays had taught him the rhythms of the local shops. He learned which baker put out yesterday's unsold loaves just before closing, which fruit and veg stall had boxes of slightly bruised apples and carrots they'd discard. He was a ghost, a scavenger, appearing at dusk to claim his meager tithe. But it wasn't enough. Hunger was a constant companion, sharper and more demanding than fear. He needed to be braver. He observed a fish and chip shop, its warm, greasy light a beacon in the chilly evenings. He saw the pattern. The friar, a burly man with a red face, would step out back for a smoke at exactly 7:15 p.m., leaving the till unattended for 3 minutes while his wife was in the stockroom. On the 4th night of observation, Harry acted. He changed. Not into a cat, but into a perfect copy of a boy he'd seen in the park, a boy with a neat school blazer, short brown hair, and a confident stride. He practiced the walk, the set of the shoulders. He couldn't copy the voice, so he'd have to be quiet. At 7:14, he was waiting nearby, his heart a drum against his ribs. The friar emerged, lighting a cigarette, and vanished into the alley. Harry pushed the shop door open, a bell ringing with horrifying cheer. The warmth and smell of frying batter hit him like a wall. His mouth flooded with saliva. The counter was high. He could just see over it. On the shelf behind, in a metal tray, were warm, golden parcels of fish and chips, wrapped in paper. No one was there. He moved fast. He reached up, his fingers straining, and grabbed 2 parcels. They were hot, greasy, wonderful. He shoved them into his satchel, turned, and ran. The bell jangled again, violently. "Hey!" A woman's voice shouted from the back. "Little thief!" He didn't look back. He ran until his lungs were fire, ducking into alleyways, changing direction, his form shimmering back to his own nondescript blonde disguise mid-sprint. He didn't stop until he was deep in the woods, the only sound his own ragged breathing and the rustle of leaves. He tore open the paper. The heat was fading, but the smell was divine. He ate the first portion in huge, burning mouthfuls, barely chewing. The second, he ate more slowly, savoring each crisp chip, each flake of white fish. It was the best food he had ever tasted. It tasted of victory. But as the grease settled in his stomach, so did the shame. The kind eyes of the charity shop lady. The shouted, "Little thief." He was surviving, but he was becoming something the Dursleys had always said he was, a delinquent. A problem. The next day, it rained. A cold, persistent drizzle that soaked through his jumper and found every gap in the root cave's defenses. Ember huddled against him, a shivering ball of fur. The woods, once a sanctuary, became a damp, green prison. Hunger returned, sharper than ever. The chip shop was too risky now. They'd be watching. He sat, hugging his knees, watching the water drip from the brambles. The gray sky pressed down. For the first time since his escape, the loneliness wasn't a quiet ache. It was a howling void. He had a power that could change his face, but it couldn't change the empty space around him. He could be anyone, but no one knew he was anyone at all. "What's the point?" A small, cold voice whispered inside him. "You're just a hungry animal in a hole. You'll die here, and no one will ever know." Asterisk. Tears, hot and furious, mixed with the rain on his face. He was so tired, so cold. A memory surfaced, fragile as a dream. Not the green light, not the laughter. A different one. A woman's voice, singing. He couldn't recall the tune, just a feeling of safety, of being held. And a man's laugh, warm and deep. His parents. Ghosts he'd never known. The Dursleys had said they were worthless drunks, killed in a car crash. But in that moment, shivering in the rain, Harry didn't believe it. People who laughed like that, who sang, didn't leave a son to this. They had left him something else. This power. It wasn't a freakish accident. It was a legacy. A weapon. A tool. He wiped his face roughly with his soggy sleeve. No. He wouldn't die in a hole. He wouldn't let them win. Not the Dursleys, not the rain, not the hunger. He needed a plan. A real one. He couldn't live in the woods forever. He needed money. Not stolen coins, but proper money. He needed to learn about what he was. Was he the only one? The word magic whispered in his mind, but he shoved it away. Magic was in storybooks. This was real. This was him. He looked at Ember, who was trying to lick water from a leaf. He had to be strong for Ember. An idea, desperate and wild, began to form. He couldn't get a job. He was 7, but he could run errands. He could be helpful. Invisible people were often ignored, but useful people were sometimes rewarded. He spent the next hour practicing. Not just changing his face, but changing his appearance. He worked on his clothes, imagining the wool of his jumper becoming finer, the corduroys darkening to a neat charcoal, the scuffed trainers becoming smart, polished shoes. It was harder. Changing inanimate things he was wearing felt like pushing the power through a thick cloth. But slowly, the fabric shifted. It didn't become new, but it looked cleaner, tidier, more presentable. He made his blonde hair neater, combed. He straightened his posture. He looked like a nice boy from a nice, if not wealthy, family. A boy you could trust with a message, or with 50 pence to run to the shop. When the rain eased to a mist, he left Ember curled up asleep and ventured out. He went to a busier street, with offices and a small newsagent. He stood near the bus stop, trying to look polite and capable. An elderly man, struggling with a folded newspaper and a walking stick, dropped his change. Coins scattered on the wet pavement. Harry darted forward. "I'll get them, sir." He quickly gathered the coins, his small fingers deft, and handed them back. "Oh, thank you, young man." Very kind, the man wheezed. Would you like me to help you to the bus? Harry asked, his voice quiet but clear. The man looked surprised, then relieved. That's very decent of you. He took Harry's arm, and Harry walked him slowly to the bus stop, holding the newspaper for him. As the bus pulled up, the man fumbled in his pocket. Here, for your trouble. He pressed a £1 coin into Harry's hand. Harry stared at it. A whole pound. Earned. Not found, not stolen. Earned. Thank you, he breathed. The man waved and boarded the bus. Harry closed his fingers around the coin. It was warm from the man's pocket. It was more than money. It was a key. He spent the afternoon performing small, visible acts of helpfulness. He returned a shopping trolley for a harassed mother. He picked up a dropped parcel for a postman. Most people just said thank you. But one woman, carrying heavy bags of shopping, gave him 20 pence. Another man, seeing him holding a door open in the wind, tossed him 50. By dusk, he had £2.70. He went to the newsagent and bought a loaf of bread, a small bottle of milk, and a tin of cat food for Ember. He paid for it, the coins passing from his hand to the shopkeepers without a flicker of suspicion. That night, in the root cave, dry thanks to a makeshift roof of broad leaves he'd rigged up, he shared the bread with Ember, who purred ferociously over his tin of food. The milk was cold and sweet. He was still a fugitive. He was still living in the dirt. But he had a pound coin left in his pocket. And he had a new name for himself, not chosen by the Dursleys, not stolen from a poster, but earned by his own 2 hands. He wasn't just a runaway. He wasn't just a Metamorphmagus. He was a survivor. And as the last light faded from the damp sky, Harry Potter looked at his small, sleeping cat, felt the weight of the coin in his pocket, and knew, with a certainty that hardened his young bones, that his fight for a life was only just beginning. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying away the scent of rain and failure, bringing the crisp, metallic hint of frost. Winter was coming, and in the heart of the woods, a boy who could wear any face prepared to meet it head-on, a single, hard-earned coin glowing like a talisman in the dark. Chapter 4, The Whisper in the Library. Winter announced itself not with snow, but with a silence. A deep, iron cold settled over the woods, silencing the insects, stilling the streams into skins of ice. The world narrowed to the hunt for warmth. Harry's breath plumed in the air inside the root cave, a constant, ghostly reminder of the fragile life he clung to. Ember, now a little larger, spent most of her days curled in the nest of Harry's second jumper, a dark blue one he'd earned from a church jumble sale by helping to stack chairs. His routine had solidified into a tense ballet of survival. Mornings were for foraging, the bakery's dawn discards, the vegetable market's wilted offerings. Afternoons were for work. His helpful boy disguise, which he'd refined to a boy named Ian, with neat brown hair and hazel eyes, became a fixture on the high street. He ran errands, carried bags, fetched things from shops. People began to recognize him, in a vague, passing way. There's that helpful lad. They paid in small coins, sometimes in sandwiches or a bruised apple. It was a precarious existence, a life built on smiles and small change, always one suspicious adult away from collapse. The money, what little he saved, wasn't for food. It was for knowledge. The public library became his sanctuary. It was warm, blissfully, overwhelmingly warm. The first time he'd stepped inside, the heat had made him dizzy. He'd chosen a disguise for it. A studious-looking boy with glasses, plain glass, achieved by warping the light over his eyes with a persistent, headache-inducing effort, and sandy hair. He called himself Ben. The librarian, a young woman named Ms. Finch with a gentle voice, had initially been suspicious of a young boy alone for hours. But Ben was quiet, well-mannered, and his hunger for books seemed genuine. He always chose a corner seat by the radiator, and he never made a mess. Harry wasn't reading children's books. He was scouring the nonfiction sections for any mention of what he could do. Biology, metamorphosis in amphibians and insects. Useless. Psychology, dissociative identity disorder and altered states. Closer, but wrong. Mythology, shapeshifters in folklore. His heart would pound as he read tales of selkies, werewolves, kitsune. But they were just stories. There was no how, no why. He found a heavy book on parapsychology and unexplained phenomena. It had a chapter on bodily transformation. His hands trembled as he turned the pages. It spoke of Indian fakirs, of shamans, of unverified accounts. The word, Metamorphmagus, was never used. The book concluded it was all likely trickery or mass hysteria. Frustration was a stone in his gut. He was real. His power was real. Why wasn't he in any of the books? One freezing afternoon, a breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. He was in the history section, pulling out a large atlas to look at maps of Britain, fantasizing about warmer places, when a smaller, very old book slid off the shelf above and landed at his feet with a thump. The Secret Lore of the British Isles, a compendium of forgotten beliefs. Asterisk. It looked ancient, its green cover faded, the pages yellowed and thick. He opened it, the smell of old paper and dust filling his nose. It was a chaotic mix of local legends, herb lore, and superstitions. He was about to shelve it when a subheading caught his eye, asterisk on the changeling child and the blood gifted. Asterisk. His breath hitched. He sank into his chair by the radiator, ember a warm weight in his satchel at his feet smuggled in under a no pets rule he considered profoundly unfair. The section on changelings was the usual fare, fairies stealing human babies. But the next part made his skin prickle. And converse to the changeling, stolen by the fair folk, is the blood-gifted child, the babe upon whom magic is laid not by external trickery, but by the deep, inherited pulse of lineage. Such children are marked not by deformity, but by a latent power that awakens often in moments of great distress or need. Their gifts are as varied as the stars, the hand that mends what is broken, the eye that sees what is hidden, the voice that commands the unruly element, the flesh that forgets its own shape. The flesh that forgets its own shape. Asterisk. Harry's heart hammered against his ribs. He read on, hunched over the brittle page. These children were once sought by the wise, to be taught and sheltered. In darker times, they were feared, persecuted as demons or witches. Their power, a birthright, was seen as a threat to the natural order. Records are scant, for the blood-gifted learned to hide in plain sight, their true natures secreted away behind masks of normality. Asterisk. A birthright, not a freakish accident, a legacy. He turned the page feverishly. The next section was titled Places of Convergence. It spoke of locations where the veil was thin, where strange things were more likely to occur. Stone circles, ancient hills, certain wild woods, and crossroads of ley lines, often marked in the modern world by places of public gathering and knowledge, where the old magic seeps through the cracks of urban stone. Asterisk. His eyes lifted from the page and swept across the quiet library. The worn carpets, the towering shelves, the soft tick of a clock. A place of public knowledge. Could it be? He shook his head. It was just an old book of silly stories. But the words sang to something deep inside him. Blood gifted. Asterisk. He needed to know more. He scanned the index, the bibliography. Most of the sources were obscure, untraceable. But one footnote referenced a text, Magical Theory, a primer by 1 A. Folly. It listed a publisher, Obscurus Books, London. Asterisk. A real book. A real publisher. Hope, fragile and wild, bloomed in his chest. He spent the next hour searching the library's catalog, then asking Ms. Finch, in his polite, voice, if they had anything by that author or from that publisher. She checked the computer, then shook her head with a kind smile. I'm afraid not, Ben. That doesn't ring any bells at all. It sounds quite niche. Perhaps it's from a small private press. Private, secret, hidden. The world, which had seemed so starkly ordinary and cruel, now had a hidden layer. A layer he belonged to. He wasn't a one-off mistake. There were others. There was a word for what he was, even if this old book hadn't used it. There was a publisher for it. The knowledge was a shield. He walked out of the library that evening into the biting cold, but he felt warmer. He had a clue, a thread to pull. His next shift into Ian, the errand boy, was charged with new purpose. He listened more carefully to the snippets of conversation around him. He looked at people differently. Was that old man feeding the pigeons just an old man, or was there a secret pulse in his blood? Was the woman who always bought strange herbs at the greengrocer just a cook, or something more? He saw no signs, but he looked anyway. A few days later, the thread pulled tighter. He was doing a big job, helping a florist carry heavy pots of poinsettias to a nearby office for Christmas decoration. The florist, a flustered woman named Carol, paid him 3 whole pounds and gave him a mince pie. As he was leaving the shop, his arms aching, he saw a man at the counter. The man was tall and thin, dressed in a long, shabby overcoat that might have been plum-colored, or just very old black. His hair was streaked with gray, and he wore small, round spectacles. But it was his demeanor that caught Harry's attention. He was asking for wolfsbane, not as a flower, but as a dried herb. It must be Aconitum napellus, specifically, the man said, his voice low and precise. Not the ornamental variety. Carol blinked. I think we might have some monkshood in the back, but it's not for sale, love. It's poisonous. Precisely, the man said, with a faint, odd smile. A necessary component. There was a pause. The man's eyes, behind the spectacles, seemed to sweep the shop. For a second, they passed over Harry, standing by the door. Harry held his breath, keeping his, face perfectly still. The man's gaze lingered for a fraction of a second too long. Did his eyes narrow, just a touch? Did they flicker to the space around Harry, as if seeing something else? Then the moment passed. The man nodded to Carol. My apologies. I shall look elsewhere. He turned and left, the bell tinkling behind him. Harry stood frozen, the mince pie warm in his hand. Wolfsbane. A necessary component. The words from the old library book echoed, the flesh that forgets its own shape. Asterisk. Was the man, like him? Or something else? Something that needed poison as a component. Without thinking, Harry dropped the pie into his satchel and slipped out of the shop. The man was already halfway down the street, his long coat flapping around his ankles. Harry followed, keeping to doorways, his heart a frantic bird in a cage. He had to know. This was the first real sign, the first person who might have answers. The man turned a corner into a quieter, cobbled lane. Harry hurried after, peering around the brick wall. The lane was empty. Completely empty. It was a dead end, bordered by high warehouse walls. No doors were open. No alleys led off it. The man had simply vanished. A chill that had nothing to do with the weather slithered down Harry's spine. He stepped into the lane, looking up, down. Nothing. Only a faint, unusual smell lingered in the cold air, a mix of dust, something bitter like burnt coffee, and a hint of ozone, like after a lightning strike. Magic. The word finally fit. It wasn't a storybook word anymore. It was in the bitter smell in the air, in the vanishing man, in the pages of the old book, in the very blood in his veins. He had magic. And so did others. A whole hidden world. And one of them, just moments ago, might have seen through his disguise. The shield of knowledge he'd felt earlier cracked, replaced by a new, more potent fear. He wasn't just hiding from the Dursleys and the police. He was hiding from an entire world he didn't understand. A world where men in plum coats asked for poisons and vanished into thin air. He backed out of the lane, his legs weak. He had been so focused on surviving the visible world, he'd forgotten to fear the invisible one. That night, in the root cave, he held Ember close. The wind howled through the trees, sounding less like weather and more like a hunt. He stared into the darkness, his mind racing. He had a clue. Obscurus books, London. A vanished man who knew about wolfsbane. A hidden world of blood gifted. London was huge, impossibly far. He was a 7-year-old boy with a cat and a few pounds. But staying here felt suddenly dangerous. The library was a crossroads. The man had been close. If he could see through disguises. Harry made a decision, his small jaw set in the dark. He couldn't stay. The woods were no longer a sanctuary. They were a trap waiting to be sprung. He would go to London. He would find Obscurus books. He would find others like him. He would find out who he truly was. It was a mad, terrifying plan. But it was a plan. A direction. He spent the next few days in a frenzy of preparation. He hoarded his earnings, foregoing food to save for a train ticket. He practiced his transformations longer, pushing his limits. He made a new, stronger face for London, an older boy, maybe 10, with a forgettable, earnest face and clothes that looked slightly too big, like a hand-me-down from an older brother. He called this one, Matthew. Matthew would be brave. Matthew would not be afraid of vanishing men. On his final trip to the library, he went not as Ben, but as himself, his own face with the scar hidden. He needed one last look at the old green book. He found it and slipped it into his satchel, a cold lump of guilt settling beside his excitement. He was stealing knowledge. He told himself it was borrowing, that he'd send it back one day. The lie didn't help. As he left the warmth for the last time, Ms. Finch looked up from her desk. "Goodbye, Ben," she said with her usual smile. "See you after the holidays." Harry as Ben looked at her, at this woman who had been kind to a lonely boy without asking questions. "Goodbye," he said, his voice thick. "Thank you." He walked out, the stolen book heavy against his side. 2 days later, with a ticket bought from a machine using carefully counted coins, Harry Potter stood on the platform of the local train station. He was Matthew, now, with a backpack containing all his worldly goods. 2 jumpers, the corduroys, the tin for Ember, a water bottle, the last of his bread, and the stolen book. Ember was a hidden, shifting warmth inside his coat. The train, a great roaring serpent of metal and noise, pulled in. The doors hissed open. People streamed on and off. This was it. The end of the woods. The end of Little Whinging forever. He took one last look at the town, a place of cupboards and cruelty and lonely libraries. No sadness, only a final, severing certainty. He stepped onto the train. The doors hissed shut behind him, sealing him into the warm, stuffy carriage. The train gave a lurch and began to move, slowly at first, then gathering speed. Houses, streets, the frozen park, the distant line of his woods, all blurred past the window, fading into a gray, rushing nothingness. He was leaving. He was going to London. To find his kind. To find the magic. To find a place where Harry Potter, the boy who lived and changed, could finally belong. As the train carried him into the unknown, the whispered words from the old book became a mantra in his mind, a promise and a warning, the flesh that forgets its own shape. Asterisk. He wouldn't forget. He would remember. And he would become. The world outside the window darkened, reflecting the face of a determined, nameless boy, racing towards a hidden heart. And deep in his pocket, the stolen book seemed to hum with a secret, sleeping power of its own. Chapter 5, The Hidden Heart of London. The train was a world of noise and strangers. The rhythmic clack-clack of the tracks vibrated up through the soles of Harry's borrowed trainers. The carriage air was thick with the smell of stale coffee, damp wool, and the sharp, clean scent of winter clinging to coats. He'd chosen a seat in the corner, by the window, keeping his, Matthew, face carefully in place, a mask of bland, tired concentration. Ember was a tense, hidden lump against his stomach, inside his jumper. He could feel the kitten's tiny heartbeat syncing with the train's rhythm, a double pulse of fear and adventure. Every time a conductor passed, or someone looked at him for too long, Harry's own heart would stutter. A boy traveling alone was unusual. A boy traveling alone with a secret, stolen book and a magical cat was a beacon for trouble. He spent the journey watching England blur past. Frozen fields gave way to the backs of houses, then to warehouses, then to a sprawling, grey tapestry of rooftops and chimneys that stretched to a soot-colored horizon. London. It was immense. A living beast of brick and steel, breathing out plumes of steam and exhaust. The sheer scale of it threatened to swallow his courage whole. How was he supposed to find one tiny, secret bookshop in all of this? The train slid into a vast, echoing cavern of a station, Waterloo. The noise exploded. Announcements crackled, incomprehensible. People surged in a tidal flow of purpose. Harry was swept off the train and into the current, clinging to his backpack, his eyes wide behind his nondescript Matthew face. He followed the crowd upstairs, through tunnels, his head on a swivel. He'd never seen so many people. They were a river of faces, 1,000 stories rushing past, none of them seeing the small, terrified boy in their midst. He found a large departures board, its clacking letters a mesmerizing dance. He didn't need a train. He needed a map, a direction. A kind-looking older woman in a stationmaster's uniform noticed him standing, lost. "You all right there, son? Lost your mum?" Harry's, Matthew, voice was thankfully steady. "No, ma'am. Meeting my uncle. Do you know where I could find a bookshop? A special one, called Obscurus." The woman's friendly expression became politely puzzled. "Obscurus? Can't say I do, love. There's W.H. Smith over there, and the big Waterstones on the high street," she pointed vaguely. "Maybe try Charing Cross Road. That's the book street. Your uncle gave you proper directions, did he?" Harry's hope deflated. I must have them written down. Thank you." He melted back into the crowd before she could ask more questions. Charing Cross Road. It was a name, a thread. Getting there involved his first trip on the underground. The tube was a different kind of beast, a rumbling, screeching creature that lived in tunnels of colored tile and hot, dusty wind. He bought a ticket with trembling fingers, following the colored lines on the map like a magical diagram. The carriage was packed, bodies pressed close. The smell was overwhelming, perfume, sweat, damp earth from the tunnels. He held his breath, focusing on the names of the stops, on keeping his face still. He emerged at Leicester Square into sensory overload. Bright lights, even in the afternoon gloom. The smell of roasted nuts and exhaust. Giant posters for movies he'd never see. And noise, a constant, throbbing hum of life. He asked a street vendor for Charing Cross Road and was pointed down a bustling street lined with famous theaters and neon signs. And then, he saw them. Bookshops. Dozens of them. Large, bright, modern ones with bestsellers in the windows. Quaint, dusty ones crammed with second-hand treasures. Specialist shops for maps, for art, for music. His heart lifted, then sank. It was a forest, and he was looking for one specific, hidden tree. He began to walk, peering into every window. Reading every sign. Foils. Blackwells. Silver Moon. No obscurus. He ventured down side streets, into alleys lined with bins, his hope dwindling with every step. The winter afternoon was fading, the sky leaching to a dirty orange. The cold was creeping back into his bones, sharper here in the city's stone canyons. He was just another street kid now, looking tired and out of place. A policeman gave him a long, considering look. Harry ducked into a doorway, his pulse racing. He couldn't linger. He needed to find the shop, or find a place to sleep. The idea of a London park at night was infinitely more terrifying than his woods. As dusk settled properly, painting the city in shades of indigo and electric white, he turned down a narrow, curving lane called Cecil Court. It was like stepping back in time. Old-fashioned gas-style lamps cast warm, flickering pools of light on Victorian shop fronts. The signs were painted wood and gilt. Antique dealers, stamp collectors, and yes, bookshops. Quaint, quiet, and utterly ordinary. His feet were throbbing, his shoulders aching from the backpack. Despair was a cold stone in his throat. He was at the end of the lane, about to turn back, when he saw it. Tucked between a shop selling musical boxes and one specializing in vintage postcards, was a narrow, unassuming door. The window beside it was small and dusty, displaying a haphazard pile of books with faded, unreadable spines. Above the door, in peeling gold leaf on dark green paint, so faint you had to be standing right in front of it to see, were the words. Obscurus books. Purveyors of the particular. No flashy sign. No opening hours. It looked closed, forgotten. But the name was right. His heart gave a painful thump. He pushed the door. It didn't budge. Locked. He rattled the handle, a spike of panic driving through him. Number. Not after all this. Asterisk. He peered through the grimy window, cupping his hands around his face. Inside was darkness, thick and still. He could just make out towering shelves, crammed to bursting, a labyrinth of knowledge. It smelled, even through the glass, of old parchment, leather, and something else, a faint, sweet spice, like cinnamon and thunderstorm. He knocked. The sound was absurdly small in the quiet lane. No answer. He knocked again, harder. Hello. Silence. Tears of frustration prickled behind his eyes. He was so close. He slumped against the door, his forehead resting on the cool wood. What now? Wait. For how long? Sleep in this alley. As he leaned there, defeated, a strange thing happened. The wood under his forehead warmed slightly. A subtle vibration, like a deep, silent hum, traveled through the door and into his skin. The magic in his blood, the shifting, restless power, stirred in response. It didn't change him, but it reached out asterisk, a silent, instinctive probe. There was a soft, decisive click from within the lock. Harry jerked back, staring. Cautiously, he reached out and turned the handle. The door swung inward without a sound. A wash of that peculiar scent, old books, spice, and ozone, flowed over him. The darkness inside was profound, but not empty. It felt waiting. He stepped over the threshold. The door swung shut behind him, sealing him in silence. The sounds of London vanished, replaced by a deep, listening quiet. The air was warm, dry. After a moment, his eyes adjusted. Faint, sourceless light seemed to emanate from the books themselves, a soft, pearly glow that lit the narrow aisles. The shop was a chaos of wonder. Books weren't just on shelves, they were stacked in teetering piles on the floor, spilling out of crates, hanging from the ceiling in bundles tied with twine. Their titles shimmered and shifted: The Transmigration of Tropical Trolls, 100 Herbal, Hints for the Hexed, Muggle Repelling, A Modern Approach. One book, bound in what looked like dragonhide, was gently chained to its shelf, a low growl emanating from its pages. This was it, The Hidden World. A little young for browsing, aren't we? The voice came from above. Harry jumped, clutching his backpack. High up, on a rolling ladder leaning against a shelf, was a woman. She was elderly, with a wild mane of white hair streaked with vibrant purple, and eyes the color of amethysts behind spectacles perched on the end of her nose. She wore layers of shawls and a dress that might have been made from a tapestry. She held a feather duster, but it looked utterly ceremonial. The door was locked, Harry stammered, his, Matthew, voice shaky. Was it? She said, her tone implying locks were trivial things. It opens for those who need to open it. Or for those who push in the right way. Her purple eyes studied him, not unkindly, but with an intensity that felt like an X-ray. You're pushing, quite hard. And you've brought a friend. Fur is terrible for the folios, you know. She knew about Ember. Harry's hand went protectively to his stomach. She's clean. She stays with me. The woman, he assumed she was the proprietor, descended the ladder with surprising grace. I am Adelaide Folly. She said the name as if it explained everything. Folly. The name from the book. Folly. Asterisk. My grandfather mentioned this shop. Harry lied, the words tumbling out. He said you had books on unusual subjects. For the blood gifted. He whispered the last term, testing it. Adelaide Folly went very still. The playful light in her eyes sharpened into something older, wiser, and far more cautious. Did he now? And what was your grandfather's name? He's passed away, Harry said, looking at the floor. It wasn't a complete lie. I see. She moved closer, and he fought the urge to step back. And what is your name, boy who pushes through locked doors? Matthew, he said, too quickly. A slow smile touched her lips. Matthew. A good, solid name. It means, gift of God. She paused, her head tilting. But it's not the name you were born with, is it? The flesh forgets, but the magic remembers. It hums a different tune. Harry's blood ran cold. She could see through him. Not just the disguise, but through it. I don't know what you mean. Of course you don't, she said, not unkindly. She reached out, not to touch him, but to gesture at the air around his head. Such a strong glamour for one so young. Self-taught, I'd wager. Crude, but effective. A metamorphagus. Rare. Very rare. The word hung in the air between them. Metamorphagus. It had a weight, a reality, that, blood-gifted, lacked. It was a classification. A species. His species. Is that what I am? His voice was a whisper. It is indeed, child. Her expression softened. And a frightened one at that. You smell of train stations and fear and Surrey. She sniffed delicately. Come. The questions can wait. First, tea. And sardines for your silent companion. She's complaining quite loudly, if you know how to listen. She turned and glided between the book piles, towards the back of the shop. Harry, his mind reeling, had no choice but to follow. The back room was a cozy, cluttered cave. A small fireplace crackled with real flames, though he saw no chimney. A kettle whistled on a hob by itself. Books were everywhere, even piled on the two squashy armchairs. She cleared one with a wave of her hand, the books floating obediently to a new stack. Sit. Let the poor thing out. She's squirming. Harry unzipped his jumper. Ember tumbled out, gave a disdainful shake, then immediately zeroed in on the hearthrug, stretching luxuriously in the heat. Adelaide busied herself with tea, placing a saucer of sardines on the floor for Ember, who fell upon them with a rapturous purr. She handed Harry a chipped mug of strong, sweet tea. He wrapped his hands around it, the warmth seeping into his frozen fingers. Now, she said, settling into the other chair, her purple eyes fixed on him. You may keep your Matthew, if you wish. It's a serviceable face. But before we speak of books or blood gifts, you will tell me the truth. Who are you running from? The directness was a shock. He looked into the fire, the tea warming his throat. The kindness in her question, the lack of immediate threat, was more disarming than any curse. The whole story, the cupboard, the Dursleys, the boar face, the escape, the woods, the library, the vanishing man, tumbled out of him in a quiet, ragged stream. He kept his own name out of it, calling himself the boy, but he didn't hide the magic. How could he? She'd already named it. When he finished, the room was quiet except for the crackle of the fire and Ember's contented chewing. Adelaide Folly sipped her tea, her gaze distant. Non-magical relatives, she said finally, the words dripping with disdain. The worst kind. Blind, fearful, and cruel. They are called muggles, child. And your kind, your parents, they were magical. Witches and wizards. Witches. Wizards. The words should have sounded silly. Instead, they felt like keys turning in long locked doors inside him. They died. In a car crash, my aunt and uncle said. Adelaide snorted. A car crash. Wizards don't die in car crashes. Not like that. She leaned forward, her voice dropping. There was a war, child. A great and terrible war, ended just a few years ago. A dark wizard, the darkest in a century. He killed many. He terrified all. Your parents, if they had you, a Metamorphmagus, their magic was strong. They were likely targeted. She studied his face, the face he was wearing. That scar you hide so carefully, may I see it? Hesitantly, Harry let the Matthew disguise melt away. The changes receded like water draining from sand. His own black hair tufted up, his green eyes cleared, and the lightning bolt scar emerged on his forehead. Adelaide Folly drew in a sharp breath. Her mug rattled in its saucer. She stood up so quickly her shawls fluttered. No, she whispered. It cannot be. What? Harry asked, fear returning. She stared at him as if seeing a ghost. The scar, the age, the power, Metamorphmagus talent is often inherited. Her eyes were wide with a mix of awe and dawning horror. Your parents. What were their names? I don't know. The Dursleys never said. But you must have heard something. A first name. Harry closed his eyes, reaching for the dream voice. Lily, he breathed. My mother was called Lily. Adelaide Folly sank back into her chair, all the color drained from her face. Lily. Lily Potter. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and her eyes filled with tears. And James. James Potter. Oh, my dear boy. You're Harry Potter. The name, his real name, spoken with such reverence and grief in this hidden, magical room, shattered something inside him. He wasn't the boy. He was someone. With a history. With parents who had names. You know them? He asked, his voice trembling. Of course I know of them. She said, a sob catching in her throat. Everyone in our world knows of them. And of you. Harry Potter. The boy who lived. The title meant nothing to him. Lived. I don't understand. The dark wizard, she said, her voice hushed with awe. He came for your family. He killed your parents. But he tried to kill you, a baby, with the killing curse. And it rebounded. It destroyed him. You survived. With that, she pointed a trembling finger at his scar. You ended the war. You are a legend, a hero. He felt sick. He was a hungry boy who slept in the dirt. He hadn't done anything. His parents had died, and he'd gotten a scar, and everyone thought he was a story. I'm not, he said, fiercely. I'm just me. I ran away. And you came here, she said, wonder in her voice. Of all the places, the magic led you here. To me. She composed herself, wiping her eyes. This changes everything. You cannot be on the streets. You cannot be unprotected. The wizarding world, they believe you are safe, hidden with your muggle relatives. I'm never going back. I would not dream of sending you back, she said, her voice firming. But you must understand, Harry. Your life is significant. There are still those loyal to the Dark Lord who would see you dead. And there are those on our side who would smother you with protection, or use you as a symbol. You are a lightning rod in a world that is only just beginning to heal. He felt the walls of this cozy room closing in. From one prison to another, from a cupboard of neglect to a cage of fame he never asked for. I don't want to be a symbol, he said, his small hands clenched into fists. I just want to be left alone. To learn. About what I am. Adelaide Folly looked at him for a long moment. At the fierce green eyes so like his mother's, at the stubborn set of his jaw that might have been his father's. She saw not a legend, but a lost, powerful, terribly vulnerable child. Then, she said slowly, we shall have to hide you in plain sight. Better than you have been doing. Matthew is a start, but he is thin, a glamour. We must build you a truth. A new life, with papers, with history. And you must learn, not just to change your face, but to understand your magic, to control it. To defend yourself. Hope, terrifying and bright, flared in his chest. You'll help me. I am Adelaide Folly, she said, as if it were an oath. My family has always stood for knowledge and for the protection of the rare and the strange. You are both. You have walked into my shop, and my shop opened for you. That is a contract of sorts. She stood, her bearing regal. You will stay here. There is a room above the shop. It has been empty for a long time. It will be yours. We will get you proper clothes, food, books. And we will begin your education. Harry looked around at the magical, cluttered, wonderful room. At the fire. At Ember, now sleeping in a blissful, fishy coma. At this strange, purple-eyed woman who knew his name and didn't want to lock him up. It wasn't freedom, not exactly. It was a new kind of cage, but one with books, and warmth, and answers. He nodded, a single, decisive movement. Okay. Good, she said. Finish your tea. Then I will show you your room. Tomorrow, we begin. As he sipped the sweet, lukewarm tea, Harry Potter, the boy who lived and changed, looked into the fire. The reflection there showed a boy with a famous scar and desperate eyes. But behind those eyes, plans were already forming. He would learn. He would grow strong. Strong enough that no one, not muggles, not wizards, not legends, not dark lords, would ever be able to control his life again. The hidden heart of London had taken him in. And within its secret, pulsing chambers, a new Harry Potter was beginning to take shape. Chapter 6, The Education of a Secret. The room above Obscurus Books was not a bedroom. It was an annex of the shop itself, a loft space where knowledge had apparently come to rest and gather dust. Towers of leather-bound volumes formed precarious walls. An old brass telescope pointed forlornly at a grimy skylight, through which the London sky glowed a perpetual bruised purple. In the center, Adelaide had cleared a space, conjuring a narrow bed, a worn but serviceable rug, and a small, claw-footed desk that seemed to sigh with relief whenever a book was placed upon it. To Harry, it was a palace. It was dry. It was warm. A small, enchanted iron stove in the corner glowed with a gentle, everlasting heat. It had a door he could close, but which was never locked from the outside. Most importantly, it was his. The first week was a blur of surreal normality. Adelaide, who insisted he call her Addie, Ms. Folly, makes me feel like a headmistress, and I was never any good at following rules, let alone making them, proved to be an eccentric but fiercely capable guardian. She took him to a wizarding alley called Diagon Alley, hidden behind a pub called the Leaky Cauldron. Harry, disguised as a sickly-looking boy with lank hair and glasses, a homage to Matthew, had his mind utterly blown. The shops. Aesop's Owl Emporium with its silent, staring birds. Flourish and Blots, where books floated to customers. Apothecaries smelling of fantastic, dangerous things. And the people, witches in pointed hats arguing over cauldron thickness, wizards in vibrant robes reading newspapers where the pictures moved. Addie, using a combination of brisk authority and what she called a few forgetfulness charms, on the right officials, procured him identification papers for one, Harold Evans, a distant, homeschooled nephew come to live with his great-aunt. The name, Evans, was his mother's maiden name, Addie told him with a significant look. It was a small, silent tribute. She bought him clothes, real wizarding clothes, not transfigured muggle hand-me-downs. Soft woolen trousers, plain shirts, and a warm, dark blue robe, for best. She also bought him books. Not storybooks, but textbooks. A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration. Magical Theory. 1000 Magical Herbs and Fungi. Asterisk. Your magic is wild, Harry, she told him over breakfast, eggs that had been laid by a bird with iridescent feathers, tasting of sunshine. Metamorphmagus ability is innate, uncontrollable for most. But you have other magic in you, the kind every witch and wizard has. That can be learned, shaped. It will give you control over all of it. And so, his education began. Mornings were for wizarding subjects. Addie was a ruthless, brilliant teacher. She had no time for nonsense. Forget waving a stick and shouting, she said, handing him a smooth, polished piece of rowan wood, a practice wand, not yet bonded to him. Magic is here. She tapped his chest. It is intention, visualization, and will. The wand focuses it, makes it easier. But you, of all people, should learn to feel it from the inside out. They started with the simplest charm, Lumos. Creating light. Harry sat at the desk, gripping the practice wand. He focused on the tip, imagining a tiny, bright pinprick. Lumos, he whispered. Nothing. You're picturing a light bulb, Addie said from her armchair, where she was mending a sock that was trying to slither away. Don't picture a thing. Be the light. Feel the magic in your core, warm and bright, and let it travel down your arm, through the wand, and become. He tried again, shutting his eyes. He thought of the light that had bloomed from his skin in the cupboard. That feeling of inner illumination. He felt the pool of warmth in his stomach, the same one he used for changing. He nudged it, not towards his skin, but down his arm, into the wood. Lumos. A feeble, sputtering glow, like a dying firefly, flickered at the wand's tip. It lasted 2 seconds and went out. He gasped, a grin splitting his face. I did it. You sparked, Addie corrected, but she was smiling. Now do it again, and again, until it's as easy as breathing. Afternoons were for Metamorphmagus training. This was harder, more intimate. It was about self-awareness on a level he'd never considered. Your power is emotional, Addie explained. They sat on the rug, ember batting at a stray sunbeam. It responded to fear, to anger, to need. Now you must teach it to respond to thought. To precision. She had him look in a full-length mirror she'd conjured. Change your eye color. Just the left one. He stared at his left green eye, willing it to turn blue. The familiar ripple passed over his face. His left eye shifted to a bright, sapphire blue. His right stayed green. Good. Now make the blue eye 3 shades darker. Not a different color, darker. He frowned, concentrating. The blue eye deepened to a navy. Now change the texture of your hair on the crown of your head. Make it curly, but keep the color and length the same. It was exhausting, finicky work. Like trying to command each individual cell in his body. He learned to change the shape of a single fingernail, to give himself a faint, convincing bruise that felt tender to the touch, to alter the pitch of his voice independently of his face. He also learned his limits. Extensive changes were draining. Holding a complex disguise for a full day left him headachy and ravenous. True, wholesale transformation into an animal, like the cat, was a massive expenditure of power. He couldn't do it more than once in a short period without collapsing. It's like a muscle, Addie said, handing him a slab of rich fruitcake after a particularly grueling session where he'd tried to morph his hand into a near-perfect replica of hers. It will grow stronger with use, and it needs fuel. Good food, rest, and a calm mind. Something you've had precious little of. Evenings were for reading and for stories. Harry devoured the magical theory books, cross-referencing with the stolen secret lore volume. The world opened up. He learned about the Ministry of Magic, the governing body that Addie sniffed at as a bunch of bureaucratic nifflers. He learned about Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and felt a sharp, unexpected pang. That was where kids like him were supposed to go. Where his parents had gone. Will I go? He asked Addie one night. She looked up from her own book, a treatise on protective warding. That is a complicated question, Harry. The wizarding world believes you are safely hidden. Dumbledore, the headmaster of Hogwarts, a very powerful and insistent wizard, placed you with your aunt himself. He will have spells, warnings, to know if you leave. We have been lucky so far. My shop is heavily warded against all sorts of detection. But Hogwarts, your name has been down for it since birth. They will expect you. When you turn 11, it will become a problem. I won't go back to the Dursleys, he said, his voice low and final. I know, she said softly. We will find a way. But for now, you are Harold Evans, my nephew. And you are learning. He learned about the war, too. Addie didn't shy away from it. She told him about Voldemort, she said the name, flinching only slightly, and his reign of terror. She told him about the Order of the Phoenix, a group that fought him, to which his parents had belonged. She spoke of his father, James, with a fond, exasperated smile, brilliant, brave, and an absolute menace as a schoolboy. She spoke of his mother, Lily, with deep respect, the brightest witch of her age, with a heart that was both fierce and kind. Harry hoarded these details like priceless gems. They were the first true portraits of his parents he'd ever had. They weren't saints, they were people. People who fought, and laughed, and loved, and died protecting him. One rainy Wednesday, about a month into his stay, the theoretical met the practical in a way that changed everything. Addie had gone out to a specialist auction for a rare grimoire, leaving Harry with strict instructions to practice his color-changing drills and not to try and feed the slightly sentient encyclopedia in the corner. Harry was bored. He'd changed his hair through every color of the rainbow and was now trying to give himself realistic-looking scales on his forearm when he heard a commotion downstairs. Not the usual gentle rustle of books, but a sharp, raised voice, a man's voice, polished and cold. Assure you, Madam Folly, the Ministry takes a very dim view of unregistered underage magical activity in a Muggle area. The trace is unmistakable. A powerful, erratic signature. Here. Harry froze, his scales melting back into skin. The Ministry. They'd found him. His heart slammed against his ribs. He crept to the top of the narrow staircase that led down to the shop floor, peering through the banisters. Addie stood behind her counter, looking unimpressed. Facing her was a wizard in impeccably severe robes of gray and black. He had a thin, pointed face, short, steel-gray hair, and carried a briefcase that seemed to hum with officialdom. The trace is a blunt instrument, Mr. Rookwood, Addie said, her voice like chilled honey. It detects magic around underage wizards, not necessarily from them. I had a rather volatile Peruvian puff pod delivered yesterday. It must have erupted. Nasty things, but fascinating. I have the paperwork. I have seen the paperwork, the man, Rookwood, said, not smiling. I am more interested in the rumors of a boy seen with you in Diagon Alley. A nephew, I believe. The records on him are sparse. He is a sickly child, Addie said smoothly. Homeschooled. He rarely leaves his room. I assure you, he is no more capable of erratic magic than this inkpot. She tapped the jar of ever-filling violet ink on her counter. Rookwood's eyes, sharp as flint, scanned the shop. They traveled over the piled books, up towards the ceiling, and up the staircase. Harry ducked back, but he felt the gaze like a physical touch. This man was dangerous. He was hunting. I should like to see him, Rookwood said. To confirm his condition. For his own safety, of course. Uncontrolled magic in one so young can be tragic. Panic, cold and sheer, shot through Harry. If he saw him, he'd know. He'd see the scar, or feel the magic on him, and he'd be taken. Back to the Dursleys, or to some ministry cell, or to Dumbledore. He couldn't be seen. Not as Harry Potter. Not as Harold Evans. He had to be no one. The instinct from the cupboard, from the woods, took over. But now, it was honed by weeks of training. He didn't just want to be invisible. He needed to be part of the scenery. He focused, not on changing into a person, but on disappearing. He thought of dust, of old paper, of shadows in the corner. He pulled the magic over himself not as a mask, but as a veil, a diffusion. His body tingled, not with the large-scale shift of bones, but with a minute, all-over adjustment. His colors muted, blending with the dark wood of the stairs and the deep shadows. His edges softened. He didn't become invisible, that was beyond him, but he became extraordinarily easy to overlook, a natural extension of the gloom. He heard footsteps on the stairs, slow and precise. Rookwood appeared, his eyes sweeping the cluttered loft. They passed over the bed, the desk, the piles of books. They passed directly over the spot where Harry stood, holding his breath, wrapped in his cloak of "Don't look here." The man's gaze held no recognition, only mild distaste for the mess. He stood there for a long minute, his presence a chill in the warm room. Below, Addie called up, her voice tight. Satisfied. The child is at a sanitarium in Scotland today for his treatments. As my paperwork states. You are distressing my stock with your aura. Rookwood's lip curled. He gave one last, dismissive glance around the room, then turned and descended. Harry didn't move until he heard the shop door close with a definitive snick. He let the camouflage drop, slumping against the wall, his whole body trembling with the effort. Addie came up the stairs two at a time. She looked at him, at the sheen of sweat on his forehead, and her worried expression melted into one of sheer pride. You didn't just change your face, she breathed. You changed your presence. That's advanced magic, Harry. Very advanced. He was going to take me, Harry said, his voice shaky. He was, Addie agreed, her face grim. Augustus Rookwood. A nasty piece of work from the improper use of magic office. Ambitious. He must have sensed something, or someone tipped him off. She put a hand on his shoulder. You did brilliantly. But this is a warning. The net is there. They are looking, even if they don't know exactly what for. We must be more careful. And you must learn faster. That incident became a turning point. The lessons took on a new urgency. Addie began teaching him practical defensive magic, not dueling, but subtlety. How to cast a muffliato charm to dull sound around him. How to lay a basic tripwire hex, a harmless, stinging jinx, she insisted. How to recognize common tracking spells. Harry learned that magic wasn't just about power. It was about cleverness. About misdirection. It was a game of hide and seek on a monumental scale, and he was the ultimate hider. He also began to explore the shop's deepest, darkest corners. In a crate labeled, Misplaced Auras, he found a small, handwritten journal. Its cover was blank, but the first page read, Observations on the Metamorphic Principle, by one who wandered. It was a personal account, theory mixed with messy, emotional scrawls. The writer spoke of the magic as a second skin, a dialogue with the self. They wrote of the loneliness of being a walking secret, but also of the joy of perfect, unobserved freedom. Harry read it by candlelight, his heart aching with recognition. He wasn't alone. Someone else had felt this. One evening, as summer finally began to brush against London with warm fingers, Harry sat with Addie by the fire. Ember, now a sleek juvenile cat, was chasing motes of light in the dust. Addie, Harry asked, looking into the flames. The man who wrote this journal, who was he? Addie was quiet for a long time. His name was Alfred, she said softly. A cousin of mine. A wonderful, restless soul. He was a Metamorphmagus, like you. He disappeared, during the war. We never found out what happened to him. Some said he ran. Some said he was caught. His journal was all that came back to me. A chill that had nothing to do with the dying fire touched Harry. Do you think he was killed by Voldemort's people? It is likely, Addie said, her voice thick. Those with rare gifts were often targeted. To be recruited, or to be eliminated. She looked at him, her amethyst eyes serious. That is why you must be more than just good at hiding, Harry. You must understand the world you are hiding from. You must know its history, its politics, its dangers. Knowledge is your best armor. Harry nodded, the weight of his legacy settling on his young shoulders. It wasn't just about surviving the Dursleys anymore. It was about surviving a magical war that had stolen his parents, a man like Alfred, and was still casting long shadows. He was Harry Potter, a secret living above a bookshop. He was Harold Evans, a sickly nephew. He was a Metamorphmagus, a creature of endless potential. And he was beginning to understand that his greatest power wasn't changing his face. It was knowing which face to wear, and when. The skylight above showed the first stars of the evening, sharp and cold. Down in the shop, a book on defensive wards snapped itself shut with a sound like a sigh. The education of Harry Potter, the boy with 1,000 faces, was well underway. And the first, most important lesson had been learned. In a world of magic, the most powerful spell of all was the one that made you forgettable. For now, it was enough. But the hunger for more, for strength, for answers, for a place to truly belong, was already burning in his green eyes, brighter than any Lumos charm. Chapter 7, The Stolen Summer. Summer in London was a soggy, grumbling beast. Heat rose from the pavement's invisible waves, thick with the smell of tar and diesel, only to be slapped down by sudden, violent thunderstorms that turned the streets into rivers. Inside obscurest books, however, the climate was perpetually that of a perfect autumn afternoon, cool, dry, and smelling of parchment and possibility. It was a bubble, and Harry knew it. The encounter with Rookwood had left a mark deeper than any scar. It was a constant hum of anxiety under his skin, a reminder that the safety of the shop was an illusion maintained by Addie's powerful wards and his own growing skill. The Ministry was a vast, snooping machine, and he was a glitch in its system it was trying to correct. He threw himself into his studies with a grim focus that worried Addie. He wasn't just learning, he was building an arsenal. Wandless magic became his obsession. If his wand was taken, or identified, he would not be helpless. It's about channeling, Addie explained, watching him strain to levitate a quill without his practice wand. Sweat beaded on his forehead. The wand is a riverbank, directing the flow. Without it, you are a floodplain. You must create your own banks, internally. Use your body, your breath, your intent as the guide. He practiced for hours. Simple things first. Making a dust bunny tremble. Warming the surface of his teacup. Cooling the air around his face on a particularly stuffy day. The magic came from the same core as his metamorphosing, but it felt different, less like rewriting his own code, more like pushing against the code of the world. It was exhausting, frustrating work, with more failure than success. But each tiny victory, the quill shuddering into the air for 5 whole seconds, felt like a revelation. He began to incorporate it into his transformations. Changing his face was one thing. Changing his face while simultaneously casting a feint, passive repello muggletum, a charm to make non-magical people subconsciously want to look away, was another. It was multitasking on a magical level, and it gave him headaches that felt like his brain was trying to knit itself a new hat. But he persisted. If Rookwood came back, he wouldn't just be a boy in the shadows, he'd be a boy wrapped in layers of, "Don't see me." His reading expanded beyond theory into darker, practical corners. With Addie's hesitant permission, he delved into books on wizarding law, specifically the statutes regarding underage magic, magical concealment, and identity fraud. He learned the loopholes. The Trace, he discovered, detected magic in the vicinity of an underage wizard, but couldn't pinpoint the caster if there were other magical adults nearby. In a place like Diagon Alley, it was useless. In a Muggle area, it was a beacon. But what if the magic was of a type so rare, the Trace didn't know how to categorize it? Addie theorized his Metamorphmagus abilities might register as a biological anomaly, rather than a spell. He also read about the last Wizarding War. Not the sanitized versions in general history books, but personal accounts, polemics, and cold ministry casualty reports. He read the names of the dead, looking for Potter, for Evans. He found them. Listed under, Order of the Phoenix, Fallen. 2 lines among hundreds. It made it real in a way stories never could. They weren't characters. They were statistics in a conflict he had supposedly ended. The weight of it was a cold stone in his gut. The Journal of Alfred, the Lost Metamorphmagus, became his secret Bible. He read it until the pages were soft. Alfred wrote of the power not as a tool for hiding, but for understanding. To wear another's face is to walk a mile in their skin, to feel the world press upon their bones. It is the ultimate empathy, and the ultimate deception. He wrote of using his ability to infiltrate, to listen, to learn secrets that could save lives. He also wrote of the danger of losing himself. When every face is yours, which one is home? I fear sometimes I am becoming a collection of masks with nothing underneath. Asterisk. Harry understood that fear. Harry was the boy in the cupboard. Harold was the sickly nephew. Matthew, and Ian, and Ben were ghosts he wore like coats. Who was he when he wasn't being anyone? He found an answer, of sorts, with Ember. With the cat, he was just Harry. The boy who shared his bread, who scratched behind her ears, who talked to her about his fears in the dark. She didn't care about his scar, his fame, or his power. She cared about warmth and sardines. In her silent, feline company, he felt most like himself, a boy, simply. Addie, sensing his introspection tipping into melancholy, decided they needed a change of scenery. "We're going on a field trip," she announced one morning. "Somewhere the air doesn't taste of other people's old spells." The field trip was to a hidden magical enclave within the New Forest. They took a series of magical transports, a grumpy old night bus that tried to eat Harry's backpack, then a portkey that was a deflated football, which hooked behind his navel and spun him through a whirlwind of color and sound before dumping them unceremoniously onto a carpet of soft, green moss. The air here was different. It was alive. It tasted of pine, damp earth, and a crackling, wild energy that made the magic in Harry's blood sing. The trees were ancient, their trunks wide enough to build houses in. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in dappled, shifting patterns. "Ley-line confluence," Addie said, breathing deep. "Magic pools here like groundwater. It's unregulated. Ministry hates it. Perfect for our purposes." Their purpose, it turned out, was foraging and practical magic. Addie taught him to identify magical plants not from a book, but by their aura, the way they tugged at his senses. He learned to harvest fluxweed by the light of the moon. It was daytime, but she showed him how to sense its lunar rhythm anyway. He collected billywig stings from a drowsy hive, his heart in his throat. She taught him to light a fire with a snap of his fingers and a focused thought, not a spell. And she let him run. Really run. Not as a cat, but as himself, through the ferns and over gnarled roots, Ember a streak of ginger at his heels. For the first time since the woods near Privet Drive, he felt a sense of space, of wildness that wasn't born of fear, but of joy. He climbed a tree, higher than he'd ever dared, and looked out over a sea of green, the wind in his real hair. Up there, he experimented. He let his features soften, blend with the dappled light and leaf shadow, practicing the camouflage he'd used against Rookwood. He became a part of the tree, a trick of the light. A family of magical deer passed underneath, never looking up. This was freedom, not just from the Dursleys, but from expectations, from history. It was intoxicating. On their last evening, as they sat by a crystal-clear stream, Addie grew serious. "Harry, your control is improving faster than I anticipated. What you did with the camouflage, it shows an instinctive grasp of advanced magical theory. It's time you learned about magical cores. Cores, the source of a witch or wizard's power," she said, drawing in the soft earth with a stick. "It's not a physical thing, but a metaphysical center. For most, it's static, a well of power that deepens with practice. But for some, with rare talents like yours, it's malleable. It can be shaped by intent, by trauma, by love. I believe your Metamorphmagus ability is intertwined with your core. When you change, you're not just altering your body, you're momentarily reconstituting your magical signature to match. It's why you can fool wards, why the trace gets confused. You're not hiding your magic, you're changing its fingerprint." The implication was staggering. "So, I could look like anyone. And to magical detection, I am them." "Potentially," Addie said, her eyes grave. "But it's dangerous. Pushing your core to mimic another's signature is like trying to hold a shape made of smoke. It's exhausting and unstable. And if you tried to mimic someone very powerful, it could rebound. Damage you. But it's possible," Harry whispered, the idea taking root. "It is," she admitted. "And it's a secret you must guard with your life. If the wrong people knew, you would be a weapon beyond price. Or a threat to be eliminated." The walk back to their portkey was quiet, the weight of this new knowledge between them. The freedom of the forest now felt like a lesson, a glimpse of his potential power, and its price. Back in London, the bubble felt smaller. The heatwave broke, replaced by a steady, drumming rain that matched Harry's restlessness. He practiced his core exercises, trying to feel the edges of his own magic, to understand its shape. It was like trying to study his own skeleton by touch, familiar yet strange, intimate yet unknown. He started venturing out on his own, in disguise, not to run errands, but to observe. He'd sit in a cafe across from the leaky cauldron, watching witches and wizards come and go, trying to sense their magical signatures as Addie had taught him. Most were a blur, a hum of commonplace energy. But occasionally, someone would pass with a crackling, dark aura that made his scar prickle, or a warm, gentle glow that felt like Addie's. He was learning to read the hidden language of magic in the air. One such afternoon, he saw something that stopped his breath. A tall, broad man with a wild mane of black hair and a beard, laughing uproariously as he exited the pub, hauling a crate of what looked like dragon-grade ale. He was accompanied by a smaller, sallow man who was sneezing violently, producing tiny, colorful sparks with each sneeze. But it wasn't them. It was the man who followed them out, pausing to light a pipe with a tap of his finger. He was older, with long, silver hair and a beard that could have housed birds, half-moon spectacles perched on his crooked nose. He wore robes of deep blue, embroidered with stars that seemed to twinkle faintly, even in the gray afternoon light. He had a kind, twinkling expression, but his eyes, as they swept the street, were shockingly blue and piercingly sharp. Harry knew him instantly, from descriptions in books, from the tone of reverence and wariness in Addie's voice whenever he was mentioned. Albus Dumbledore, the man who had left him on the Dursleys' doorstep, the leader of the Light, the most powerful wizard in Britain. A tidal wave of conflicting emotions crashed over Harry: awe, resentment, curiosity, and a primal, instinctive fear. This was the architect of his first prison. This was also the man who had fought Voldemort, who had led his parents. Dumbledore stood there, puffing on his pipe, seemingly lost in thought. Then, slowly, those brilliant blue eyes turned. They traveled across the busy street, past the cars, the shoppers, and landed directly on the window of the cafe where Harry sat, disguised as a plain, brown-haired boy reading a comic. There was no recognition. Of course not. But the gaze held. It was as if Dumbledore was looking not at his face, but at the space he occupied. At the magic around him. Harry froze, his own magic instinctively pulling inward, wrapping around his core, mimicking the dull, flat signature of the non-magical world around him. He became, magically, a blank spot. A hole in the fabric. Dumbledore's eyes narrowed, just a fraction. A faint frown line appeared between his brows. He took a long pull on his pipe, the smoke forming strange, intricate shapes that didn't dissipate. He seemed to be considering something. Then, the big, black-haired man bellowed, "Albus! The fire whiskey's not going to drink itself," and clapped a hand on Dumbledore's shoulder. The moment broke. Dumbledore smiled, the twinkle returning to his eyes, and allowed himself to be led away. He glanced back once, a final, thoughtful look at the cafe window, before vanishing into the crowd. Harry didn't move for 10 minutes. His hands were shaking so badly he spilled his cold tea. Dumbledore had felt something. Not Harry Potter, but an anomaly. A puzzle. He was no longer just hiding from the Ministry's blunt instruments. He was hiding from the keenest eyes in the wizarding world. And those eyes had just glanced in his direction. He returned to the shop in a quiet panic. He told Addie everything. She listened, her face growing paler. "He wouldn't have seen through you," she said, more to reassure herself than him. "My wards on you are strong, and your own obfuscation is remarkable. But Albus Dumbledore, he has senses that go beyond spells. He feels the shape of things. The wrongness, or the rightness, of magic. He likely sensed a quiet place. An absence where there should be a presence. It would intrigue him. He loves a mystery. Will he look for it?" Harry asked, his voice small. "He is a very busy man," Addie said, but her tone lacked conviction. "But yes, if it piqued his interest, he may make inquiries. Subtle ones." The stolen summer was over. The idyll in the forest, the joy of learning, the fragile sense of safety, all of it was now shadowed by the piercing blue gaze of an old wizard on a rainy London street. That night, Harry lay in his bed under the skylight. The stars were hidden by cloud. He thought of Alfred's journal, of the fear of becoming a collection of masks. He thought of Dumbledore, a man who saw through masks. He thought of his core, this malleable, powerful thing inside him. He had a sudden, clear realization. He couldn't just learn to hide better. He couldn't just learn to defend himself. He needed to learn to become. To not just mimic signatures, but to understand them so completely he could build a new one from scratch. A signature that was strong, unremarkable, and utterly, convincingly someone else. A person who could walk in both worlds without raising an eyebrow. A person who could even, perhaps, one day, meet Dumbledore's gaze without flinching. He got out of bed and went to his desk. He pulled out a fresh sheet of parchment and a quill. At the top, he wrote, "Project Proteus." And underneath, he began to list everything he knew about magical signatures, wards, the trace, and Metamorphmagus theory. He sketched diagrams of layered disguises, physical, magical, and psychological. He wasn't just a student anymore. He was a researcher, a strategist. The boy who lived was gone. The boy who changed was evolving. And in a hidden room above a secret bookshop, a plan began to take shape, a plan not just to survive, but to craft a life so solid, so real, that not even Albus Dumbledore could unpick its threads. The rain tapped a steady, secret rhythm against the glass, a code only he was learning to decipher. Chapter 8, Proteus. The name was a promise and a curse. Proteus, the shape-shifting sea god of myth, who knew all things but would only speak truth if held fast while he changed form. Harry had found the reference in one of Addie's oldest tomes, sandwiched between a treatise on Bogart psychology and a manual for taming flobberworms. It felt right. It felt like a destiny he could choose, not one thrust upon him. Project Proteus wasn't about creating a single new identity. It was about building a system. A methodology for becoming anyone, anywhere, with a magical footprint so seamless it was undetectable. It was the work of a lifetime, and he was giving himself a head start at age 8. Addie watched his manic focus with a mixture of pride and deep concern. She saw the shadows under his eyes, the way he pushed his dinner around his plate, his mind clearly leagues away. She'd find him at dawn, already at his desk, scribbling notes, a faint, self-imposed glamour of different eye colors flickering as he tested theories of magical leakage. "You'll burn your core out before it's fully formed," she warned one evening, placing a steaming cup of calming chamomile next to his parchment. He had 3 books open, cross-referencing passages on aura theory, magical genealogy, and advanced transfiguration. "I have to get it right," he muttered, not looking up. Dumbledore looked. "He's the key. If I can fool him, I can fool anyone. Then I'm free." "Freedom built on a foundation of exhaustion is a prison of its own, Harry," she said softly. But she didn't stop him. She understood the driving fear, the need for control. Instead, she began to guide his chaos. She taught him occlumency. Not the brutal, defensive mind fortress used against legilimency, but a gentler, more profound version. "It's not about building walls," she said, sitting with him on the rug, the shop silent around them. "It's about mastering the landscape of your own mind. Knowing every thought, every memory, so you can arrange them, quiet them, or present only what you choose. It is the foundation. If your mind is chaotic, your magic will be, and your disguises will have cracks." It was perhaps the hardest thing he'd ever attempted. Sitting still, trying to clear his mind, was agony. His thoughts were squirrels in a sack, scrabbling, panicked, relentless. Memories of the cupboard, of Uncle Vernon's purple face, of green light and laughter, of the cold woods, of Dumbledore's blue eyes. They assaulted him. Addie taught him to observe them without engagement. "Imagine your mind as a river," she'd say in her calm, clear voice. "The thoughts are leaves floating on the surface. Watch them pass. Don't jump in after them." Slowly, painstakingly, he learned. He built a quiet place inside himself, a still pool beneath the turbulent river. He couldn't hold it for long, but the moments of clarity were revolutionary. In that stillness, he could feel his magical core not as a turbulent storm, but as a pulsing, intricate star. He could sense its edges, its rhythms. This was the control he craved. With a calmer mind, his practical work improved exponentially. He began constructing his first true protean identity. He didn't pick a person, he built a template. A boy from a minor, fading wizarding family, one so obscure and unremarkable. It wouldn't raise questions. The Folly name was too close to Addie, so he combed through her genealogical charts and settled on Cresswell. An Old English name, magical lineage thin but traceable, no known living descendants of the main branch. He created Leo Cresswell. Leo was 12, older than Harry, to account for his slight build and serious eyes. Leo had parents who were magical researchers often abroad, leaving him in the care of a reclusive great-aunt, a convenient, unseen Addie-like figure. Leo was homeschooled, quiet, intellectually curious but socially awkward. It was a backstory designed to explain solitude, knowledge, and a lack of friends to verify his tale. The physical face took a week of meticulous work. He didn't just change features, he gave Leo a history. A faint scar on the chin from a childhood fall. A slight unevenness to his teeth. A habitual way of squinting his right eye when thinking, which he practiced in the mirror until it was unconscious. He crafted a voice for Leo, a touch higher than his own, with a hesitant, precise cadence. Then came the magic. This was the true test of his theory. Using his occlumency to hold Leo's story firmly in the forefront of his mind, he would reach for his core and persuade it. He didn't force it to change, he asked it to resonate with the idea of Leo. A boy of weak but present magical blood, untrained, his signature a faint, muddy smudge. The first attempts were disastrous. His magic would rebel, sputtering between signatures, causing a painful feedback that felt like his bones were tuning forks struck wrong. He'd end up nauseous and drained, his own face slipping back like a snapped rubber band. But he persisted. Failure was data. Each misfire taught him about the connection between intent, emotion, and magical output. He learned that to be Leo, he couldn't just think like Leo, he had to believe he was Leo, for those moments. It was a kind of controlled, temporary insanity. Finally, after a month of daily failure, it happened. He was in his quiet place, the story of Leo Cresswell wrapped around him like a cloak. He breathed in, and as he exhaled, he let go of Harry completely. Not hiding him, but setting him aside in a compartment of his mind. A gentle, seamless shift flowed through him. No dramatic tingling, no rippling skin. It was as if the air around him settled into a new, lower frequency. He looked in the mirror. Leo Cresswell looked back. A boy with ash-brown hair, hazel eyes, and that faint scar. But more than the face, the feel was different. The magic emanating from him was dull, soft, unremarkable. It was the magical equivalent of beige. He held it. For an hour. He walked around the room as Leo, read a book as Leo, even practiced a simple lumos. The light that sprang from his finger, he didn't use a wand for Leo, was feeble and wan, perfectly matching the signature. When he let it drop, the return to himself was a wave of profound exhaustion, but also of elation so sharp it brought tears to his eyes. He had done it. He had built a person from the magic up. Addie, sensing the successful shift, came upstairs. She took one look at his tear-streaked, triumphant face and pulled him into a fierce hug. "You brilliant, impossible boy," she whispered, her own voice thick. But the true test was the outside world. A week later, Addie announced they were going to a minor artifact auction in a tucked-away corner of Diagon Alley. It was the perfect testing ground. Crowded, full of odd magical signatures, a place where a boy like Leo might be brought by a guardian. Dressed in new, slightly too formal robes for a boy his assumed age, Harry became Leo. He felt the identity settle over him, the quiet hum of Leo's weak magic a comforting disguise. He followed Addie, who was playing the part of his severe, scholarly, Aunt Adelaide, down the bustling alley. The auction house was a cramped, dark room smelling of mildew and old power. Grizzled witches and wizards examined tarnished silver instruments, chipped vials, and books bound in questionable leather. Harry as Leo stuck close to Addie, letting his eyes widen with a convincing mix of boredom and awe. He focused on maintaining Leo's signature, on keeping his occlumency walls smooth. He felt the brush of other magical auras, sharp, greedy, curious. None lingered on him. He was part of the furniture. Then, he saw her. A witch, standing near the back, examining a cracked crystal ball. She was tall and thin, with a face that might have been handsome once but was now sharp and sour. Her robes were expensive but severe. And her aura, it was like cobwebs and cold tea, a dry, grasping kind of magic. But it was her eyes that froze him. Pale, lashless, and bulging slightly, they swept the room with a dismissive glare. They passed over him, and stopped. A flicker of something, not recognition, but a sharp, analytical interest. Her head tilted. She took a step closer. Panic, hot and immediate, threatened to crack Leo's shell. She sees. She knows. He felt his occlumency waver, Leo's signature wobble. He forced himself to look down at his shoes, to think of Leo's boring life, of his imagined parents' dull research letters. Addie's hand came down, firm and proprietary, on his shoulder. "Don't fidget, Leo," she said, her voice carrying in the quiet room. "And don't stare. It's rude." The witch's lips pursed. "A Folly, aren't you?" she said to Addie, her voice like rustling parchment. "I didn't know you had progeny." "Great nephew," Addie said coldly, not offering a name. "The Cresswell line." Cresswell. The witch tasted the word, finding it bland. Her bulbous eyes bored into Harry again. "He has a curious aura." Muffled. Almost stunted. "A childhood ailment," Addie said, her grip tightening imperceptibly on Harry's shoulder. "It affected his magical development. We manage. Now, if you'll excuse us, the bidding is about to start." She steered Harry away, putting her body between him and the witch's gaze. He could feel the woman's eyes on his back, a cold, probing pressure. He didn't breathe properly until they were back in the bright chaos of Diagon Alley. The sun felt alien on Leo's skin. "Who was that?" he whispered, still in character as they walked. "Arabella Figg," Addie muttered, her face tight. "A petty busybody with a talent for sensing magical anomalies. A cat fanatic and a known snoop for the ministry. An unfortunate encounter." She sensed something wrong, Harry said, the fear curdling in his stomach. "She sensed something unusual," Addie corrected. But Aunt Adelaide gave her a plausible, pathetic explanation. "A stunted magical core is a tragedy, not a threat. It makes you beneath notice, even for a gossip like Fig. In a way, it's perfect." It was a cold comfort. The encounter proved Leo could pass casual inspection, but also that intensely perceptive individuals could spot the seams. Project Proteus needed refinement. The incident lit a new fire under him. He began to study not just how to build a signature, but how to embed tiny, deliberate flaws. A magical stutter. a slight allergic reaction to certain charms. Quirks that would explain any oddity and make the identity more believable. He also started training in earnest for physical confrontation. Wandless magic was one thing, but sometimes you needed to run, to fight, to escape. Addie, to his surprise, knew basic wandless combat forms, not for dueling, but for disrupting an opponent's balance, breaking grips, creating distractions. They practiced in the forest clearing, now a regular retreat. Harry learned to trip Jinx with a kick to the ankle charged with intent, to create a blinding flash of light by clapping his hands together with focused will. It was dirty, pragmatic magic, the kind they didn't teach at Hogwarts. The kind you used when you had no wand and nowhere left to run. One afternoon, during such a session, Addie grew quiet. They were resting by the stream, ember chasing sunlight on the water. "Harry," she said, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "There is something, a branch of magic that is deeply illegal. And deeply dangerous. But for someone with your gifts, and your needs, it might be relevant." He turned to her, curious. "What is it?" "Legilimency. And its inverse, occlumency you are learning. But true legilimency, the art of extracting feelings and memories from another's mind, it is a violation. But to defend against the highest levels of it, you must understand its shape." "You want to teach me legilimency?" he asked, shocked. "Merlin, no," she said quickly. "I am no legilimens. But I can teach you to recognize its touch. And, there are objects. Rare, dark objects that can simulate the experience, allow you to practice defense in a controlled way. I have one. A black mirror. It doesn't read your mind, but it reflects your own fears, your own memories, back at you in a twisted, invasive way. Resisting it uses the same muscles as resisting a mental attack." Harry thought of Dumbledore's piercing gaze, of Fig's probing stare. He nodded. "I need to know." The black mirror was a small, handheld thing, its surface not glass but a pool of trapped shadow. When Harry looked into it, his reflection didn't show Leo, or any of his faces. It showed a small boy in a cupboard, trembling. Then it shifted, Uncle Vernon, his face morphing into a boar, his hands reaching. Then green light. Then the cold, hungry eyes of the wizard in the plum coat from Little Whinging. Then Dumbledore, his blue eyes not twinkling, but dissecting. The visions weren't just seen, they were felt. The despair of the cupboard, the terror of the boar face, the icy grief of the green light. They pressed against his occlumency walls, seeking cracks. The first session left him vomiting into the ferns, shaking uncontrollably. It was 1,000 times worse than any physical pain. But he went back. Again and again. Each time, he learned to steady his quiet pool, to let the horrific images flow over it without disturbing the depths. He learned to separate the memory from the emotion, to observe the terror without being consumed by it. He was tempering his mind in a furnace of his own worst moments. After one particularly brutal session, where the mirror had shown him Addie turning him over to a smiling, cold-eyed Dumbledore, he lay on the forest floor, gasping. "Why?" he croaked out. "Why put me through this?" Addie's face was etched with pain. "Because the world is not kind to secrets, Harry. And your secret is the greatest of all. There will be people, not just busybodies like Fig, but powerful, skilled people, who will want inside your mind. To use you. To control you. To destroy you. You must have a fortress they cannot breach. Not just to hide your face, but to hide yourself. The self that is planning, that is afraid, that remembers. That self is your only true possession. You must protect it at all costs." He understood then. This wasn't just about becoming Leo Cresswell. It was about ensuring that no matter what face he wore, what magic he mimicked, the core of him, the boy who decided, who loved his cat, who missed parents he never knew, who was fiercely, stubbornly alive, remained inviolate. Project Proteus had a new, deeper objective. It wasn't just about crafting an identity. It was about forging an unbreakable will. As autumn began to bleed the green from the trees, Harry Potter, disguised as a boy named Leo, walked through a forest of his own making. One foot in a world of magical theory and crafted lies, the other in a world of brutal mental discipline. He was 8 years old, and he was building an armor no spell could penetrate, learning to wear a skin not even magic could see through. The path was dark, and painful, and self-chosen. And with every step, the ghost of the boy in the cupboard grew fainter, replaced by the emerging, formidable silhouette of a survivor who could be anyone, and therefore, could not be caught. Chapter 9, Echoes and Anchors. London in autumn was a symphony of decay and new beginnings. The leaves in the parks turned to flame and fell, crunching underfoot, while the city itself seemed to hunker down, pulling its stone collar up against the creeping chill. Inside obscurest books, the eternal season held, but a new tension had taken root, a quiet, humming watchfulness. The encounter with Arabella Figg had been a tremor, a warning of unstable ground. Harry's response was to dig deeper. Project Proteus expanded, evolving from a single identity into a network of potential selves. In a ledger bought from a Muggle stationer's, he found their blank books comfortingly free of magical eavesdropping. He began meticulous profiles. Leo Cresswell was his primary, his most polished shell. But there were others, sketched out in the margins. Ewan, a Muggle-born boy from Scotland visiting a cousin. Thomas, a sickly wizard child from a family of curse breakers, his magic erratic due to exposure to ancient tombs. He practiced switching between them, not just changing his face and signature, but his posture, the rhythm of his breathing, the way his eyes focused. Addie would call out a name at random over breakfast, and he had 3 seconds to become that person. The first few times, he spilled his juice. Within a week, he could do it between bites of toast, the shift so subtle it was just a blink and you'll miss it softening of the air around him. But the work was taking its toll. The constant mental exertion, the sessions with the Black Mirror, the pressure of maintaining a fiction even in the safety of the shop, it was sandpaper on his soul. He had nightmares not of Voldemort or the Dursleys, but of forgetting which face was his own, of looking in a mirror and seeing a featureless, shifting blur. Alfred's journal entry about becoming, a collection of masks, now felt less like a warning and more like a prophecy. The only thing that tethered him was Ember. The cat was his anchor, a creature of pure, unmagical instinct who cared not for Leo or Thomas, but for the hands that fed her and the lap that offered warmth. She slept on his bed every night, a warm, purring weight on his feet, and her simple, selfish affection was a balm. She was his proof that somewhere under the layers of magic and deception, Harry still existed. Addie saw the strain. She began to insist on anchor days. 1 day a week, no magic. No transformations, no occlumency drills, no reading of magical texts. They would be Harold and his great-aunt Adelaide, doing mundane things. They visited the British Museum, where Harry stared, awestruck, at Egyptian sarcophagi that, Addie whispered, likely contained wizards whose secrets died with them. They took a boat on the Thames, the wind whipping color into their cheeks. They even went to the cinema, where Harry sat mesmerized by a cartoon movie, losing himself in the bright, loud, simple story. On these days, he was just a boy. A quiet, too knowing boy, perhaps, but a boy nonetheless. It was a reset for his magic and for his mind. It was on one such anchor day, in a vast, echoing railway station, that the past reached out and tapped him on the shoulder. They were seeing off a shipment of rare books to a collector in Paris, a complicated process involving a suspiciously normal-looking trunk and a lot of whispered spells near the platform 9 3/4 barrier at King's Cross. As they turned to leave, Harry's eye was caught by a family. A large, red-haired man with a kind, harassed face was shepherding a small herd of children. A plump, warm-looking woman was trying to corral twin boys who were already attempting to climb a luggage trolley. A girl with bushy brown hair and protuberant front teeth was lecturing a sullen-looking boy about the correct way to hold his owl cage. And trailing at the back, clutching a battered chocolate frog card, was a little boy, maybe 6, with flaming red hair and a smudge of dirt on his nose. The Weasleys. He knew them instantly from Addie's descriptions and from the moving photographs in the Daily Prophet she sometimes left lying around. Arthur Weasley, of the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office. Molly. Fred. George, Percy, Ginny, Ron. Ron, the boy who, in another life, might have been his first friend. The boy whose family was synonymous with everything the light stood for: loyalty, warmth, chaotic goodness. Harry stood frozen, Harold's plain face forgotten, his occlumency walls utterly down. He watched as Ron dropped his frog card and the twins immediately pretended to stamp on it, sending the younger boy into howls of outrage that were quickly soothed by his mother. There was a loud, messy, loving normality to it that was more alien to Harry than any magical creature. It was a universe away from the cupboard, from the careful silence of the bookshop, from the lonely, precise work of building personas. A longing hit him so powerfully it was a physical ache in his chest. It wasn't for fame or for his lost legend status. It was for that. The noise, the mess, the uncomplicated belonging. Addie, sensing his stillness, followed his gaze. Her hand found his shoulder. The Weasleys, she murmured. Good people. Thick as thieves and poor as church mice, but their hearts are in the right place. They're going to platform 9 3/4, Harry whispered. They're going to Hogwarts. Some of them are, Addie said. The older boys. Young Ron has a few years yet. They watched as the family, with much laughter and scolding, vanished through the seemingly solid barrier between platforms 9 and 10. The space they left behind felt emptier, colder. Harry didn't speak on the journey home. The anchor day was ruined. The glimpse of that other life, the life he was supposed to have, surrounded by magical friends, heading off to a school he'd only read about, had stirred up a deep, restless discontent. That night, in his room, he didn't work on Project Proteus. He took out Alfred's journal, turning to a well-worn page. The greatest danger is not discovery, Alfred had written, the ink frantic. It is envy. Watching from the shadows as others live the life you cannot have. It breeds a bitterness that can poison your core, make your transformations taste of ash. You must find your joy in the freedom of the shadows, or the shadows will consume you. Harry closed the book. Alfred was right, but how did you find joy in shadows? He needed a purpose beyond survival. A reason to use his skills that wasn't just about hiding. The answer presented itself, as answers often did in obscurest books, in the form of a forgotten file. He was helping Addie reorganize a section on magical law, precedent and loopholes, when a faded manila folder slid out from behind a tome on Goblin Treaty law. It was labeled, in spidery handwriting, MIA. Presumed lost, Order of the Phoenix. His breath caught. MIA. Missing in action. He opened it. Inside were not official reports, but clippings, letters, notes in various hands. Lists of names. Many had, confirmed Kia, stamped over them in angry red ink. Others had question marks. His parents were there, their line ending with the final, stark red stamp. But others just trailed off. Caradoc Dearborn, last seen guarding Safehouse L. No body recovered. Possibility of capture or desertion. Edgar Bones, family annihilated. He disappeared post-funeral. Grief-stricken or targeted. And then, a name that made his heart stutter. Alfred Folly, Metamorphmagus. Last communication cited, infiltration deep cover. No further contact. Status, unknown. High risk of compromise. Addie's cousin. Not just lost. Missing on a mission. He took the folder to her. She was stirring a pot of soup that was trying to sing opera. She went very still when she saw it, the spoon halting mid-stir. Where did you find that? In the law section. Addie, these people. They're just gone. No one knows. War is messy, Harry. People vanish. Sometimes the earth is kinder than the enemy, and doesn't give them back. But what if they're not dead? He pressed, a idea, wild and dangerous, taking root. What if they're trapped, hidden, like I was, but with no Addie to find them? Alfred, he was like me. What if he's stuck in a disguise he can't drop? Or being held somewhere? Addie's face was a mask of old grief. It is a thought that has kept me awake many nights. But the war is over. The Ministry declared victory. The oars moved on to other threats. The missing, or a footnote. But we could look, Harry said, his voice low and intense. Not the Ministry. Us. You have the knowledge. I have the skills. I can go places, meet people, ask questions no one else can. I could find them, bring them home. He saw the conflict in her eyes, the fear for him, the spark of long-buried hope. Harry, it would be incredibly dangerous. You'd be poking hornets' nests that have been quiet for years. Some of these disappearances, they may have been inside jobs. Betrayals. You could walk right into a trap. I've been living in a trap my whole life, he said, his green eyes holding hers. This would be using it. Making it mean something. Not just hiding to save myself, but hiding to find someone else. He gestured to the folder. For them. For Alfred. The word, purpose, hung unspoken between them. Addie was silent for a long time, the only sound the soup's rebellious gurgle. Finally, she let out a long, slow breath. We would need rules, protocols, exhaustive planning, no reckless heroics. You are not an Auror. You are a scout, a ghost, in and out, information only. And we start small. Not with Alfred. Someone, simpler, lower risk. A fierce, bright joy, entirely new, blazed in Harry's chest. It wasn't the messy joy of the Weasley family, but it was his. A mission. A reason. They started with Caradoc Dearborn. The file was thin. Last known location, a safe house in a Welsh coastal village called Laregum. A place so small it was almost fictional. The official conclusion was Death Eater ambush, body vanished, likely destroyed. A week later, under a gray sky-threatening sleet, Harry Potter disappeared. In his place, a ministry social worker named Megan Jones got off a rickety local bus in Laregum. Megan was a masterpiece, a woman in her 30s with a kind, tired face, wearing slightly out-of-fashion robes, carrying a clipboard and a bag full of pointless forms. Her magical signature was a bland, bureaucratic hum. Harry had spent days perfecting her, using a combination of his own magic and subtle, charmed accessories from Addie's collection to alter his height and build. It was the most complex transformation he'd ever attempted, holding the feminine form and signature for hours. It made his head pound, but the focus required was its own kind of anchor. He walked the single, windswept street, asking harmless questions at the post office, the pub. He showed a sketched likeness of Dearborn, provided by Addie, saying he was a distant relative trying to settle a will. The villagers were reticent, cloaked in that particular suspicion reserved for outsiders and government officials. But at the pub, an old fisherman, deep in his cups, slurred something about that quiet bloke who liked night fishing, pointing a gnarled finger towards the northern cliffs. The safe house, what was left of it, was a tumble-down crofter's cottage half swallowed by gorse. The air around it tasted of old violence and salt. Harry, as Megan, walked the perimeter, his senses stretched. He felt no lingering dark magic, no human presence. But down the cliff path, where the fisherman had pointed, he found something. Not a body. A clue. Half buried in scree was a small, silver flask. It was charred, dented, but the inscription was still legible, to CD stay strong. The order endures. Asterisk. Caradoc Dearborn's flask. Not destroyed. Dropped. He didn't touch it with his hands. He used a handkerchief, bagged it. This wasn't evidence of death. It was evidence of a fight, a flight. Had Dearborn gone over the cliff? Been taken? He'd been here. Alive, after the supposed ambush. It was a thread. A tiny, frayed thread, but it was more than the ministry had. That night, back in the shop, the exhaustion was monumental, but it was a clean tiredness. He presented the flask to Addie. Her hands shook as she took it. He was here, she whispered. After they said he died. We can look further, Harry said, his own voice hushed with triumph. Check other missing persons. Cross-reference last sightings. There might be patterns the ministry missed. For the first time, Project Proteus had a target outside of himself. The masks, the signatures, the lies, they were no longer just a shield. They were a tool. A key for unlocking other people's prisons. He had seen the life he couldn't have on a railway platform. It had hurt. But here, in the dusty back room of a secret bookshop, he was building a life he could have. One of purpose. Of quiet, secret victories. He was Harry Potter, the boy who lived. He was Harold Evans, the sickly nephew. He was Leo Cresswell, the unremarkable heir. He was Megan Jones, the diligent social worker. And he was becoming something else, too, a finder of lost things. A whisper in the aftermath of war, seeking echoes of the fallen, and perhaps, the living. As he lay in bed, Ember a solid weight against his side, he didn't feel like a collection of masks. He felt like a network of possibilities. And at the center, the anchor holding it all together, was not a face or a name, but a purpose he had chosen for himself. The shadows, he realized, didn't have to be lonely. They could be a place of work, of meaning, and in the dark, Harry allowed himself a small, real smile. It was the first one that felt entirely, uncomplicatedly, his own. Chapter 10, The Ghost in the Machine. The flask was a lodestone. It sat on Addie's workbench, a small, scarred piece of silver that pulled at them both, a silent accusation against the official record. Caradoc Dearborn had not vanished in a blaze of spellfire, he had fought, dropped a keepsake, and then, gone. It was a story with a missing second act, and Harry was determined to write it. But a single clue was not a map. They needed data, patterns, the invisible connections the overworked, victory-drunk Aurors had missed. This led Harry deeper into a different kind of magic, the magic of information. Addie's shop was a labyrinth of knowledge, but it was a sleepy, ancient beast. What they needed was something sharper, more current. The Ministry of Magic's bureaucratic heart. It's a fortress, Addie warned, tracing a complex ward diagram in the air with a puff of smoke from her pipe. Layered with enchantments against intrusion, deception, and unauthorized entry. You cannot just walk in as Megan Jones and ask to see the classified MIA files. Then I won't be unauthorized, Harry said, a plan already crystallizing in his mind. It was audacious, terrifying, and appealed to the part of him that had stared down Uncle Vernon's boar face. All be expected. He spent 3 weeks in preparation, a period of intense, focused study that made his work on Project Proteus look like child's play. He targeted the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes. It was, according to Addie's old ministry guides and gossip, the most overworked, underfunded, and gloriously chaotic department. Paperwork was its lifeblood and its curse. His new identity was Finch, a junior clerk on temporary assignment from the Archival Review Subcommittee, a bureaucratic phantom department he invented, banking on the fact that in any large government, no one knows everyone, and everyone assumes someone else has authorized it. Creating Finch was an exercise in absolute mundanity. He was a man in his early 20s, with a pale, forgettable face, lank hair, and a permanent slight slouch from years over a desk. His robes were second-hand, slightly frayed at the cuffs, and smelled faintly of ink and dust. His magical signature was the key, a flat, papery drone, the magical equivalent of white noise. It was the most boring signature Harry had ever crafted, designed to be instinctively tuned out by anyone with even a modicum of power. He practiced until he could hold Finch for 8 hours straight, his mind partitioning into a serene, paperwork-obsessed drone while a hidden part remained alert, observing. He learned ministry jargon from dusty procedural manuals. He practiced the correct way to fill out a Form B77 Notice of Arcane Residue and the proper color of ink for filing quarterly troll-related incident reports mauve. The day of the infiltration dawned with a thin, London drizzle. Harry, as Finch, apparated with Addie to a side alley near Whitehall. She cast a last, complex series of wards over him, not to hide him, but to make him smell, magically, of the ministry's own stone and bureaucracy. Like a chameleon in a government office, she muttered, her hands trembling slightly. Remember, in by 9, out by 5. Look bored. Be invisible. If you feel any ward probe deeper than surface level, abort. The emergency port key is in your left pocket. Squeeze it, don't say it. He nodded, his Finch face expressionless. He entered the red telephone box that served as a visitor's entrance, dialed the meaningless number, spoke his cover story in a monotone to the disembodied voice, and received a silver visitor's badge that read, Finch, ARSC Temp. The atrium was a blow to the senses. Enormous, gleaming dark wood, a peacock blue ceiling with moving golden symbols, fireplaces lining the walls where witches and wizards flowed in and out in bursts of green flame. The air crackled with purpose and magic. Finch, with his dull aura and stooped shoulders, was a pebble in a roaring river. He was jostled, ignored, utterly unremarkable. It was perfect. He took the lift down to level 5, Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes. The chaos was beautiful. Paper aeroplanes made of memos zoomed overhead, colliding in midair and showering confetti. Harried-looking wizards argued over leaking cauldrons. A witch was trying to coax a confused-looking gnome out of a filing cabinet. Finch found an empty, dusty desk in a corner, piled high with unsorted files. He sat. He sighed, a sound of profound tedium. He began to sort. For hours, he was the perfect ghost in the machine. He fetched tea. He nodded sympathetically at a wizard complaining about nifflers in the treasury. He filed. He stamped. He created a small, neat stack of processed paperwork. His magic remained a low, uninterested hum. No one asked for his credentials. His visitor's badge was glanced at and dismissed. He was part of the furniture. During his lunch break, he wandered. He found the records annex, a cavernous, dimly lit room where years of case files were stored. The air was thick with the smell of aging parchment and defeat. The archivist, a wizard so old he seemed made of dust, didn't look up from his racing newspaper. The photographs of the horses were moving far too fast. Finch's objective wasn't the MIA files directly. Those would be in magical law enforcement, heavily guarded. His target was the cross-referenced incident reports. A vanished wizard often left a trail of strange accidents in their wake before they disappeared, unauthorized apparition signatures, odd magical disturbances, sightings of mysterious figures. He began pulling files with a methodical boredom, looking for cases from the final years of the war, from regions where Order members had gone missing. He wasn't reading for content, not yet. He was using a modified Revelio charm Addie had taught him, a gentle, wandless pulse that would cause any mention of a name from their list to emit a faint, warm glow visible only to him. It was slow, delicate work. The charm was a fragile thread of magic he had to maintain while holding Finch's utterly inert signature. His headache began as a dull throb behind his eyes. He found nothing for Caradoc Dearborn. But as he skimmed a file on a series of unexplained ward failures in a Yorkshire village in 1981, the parchment under his fingers warmed. The glow settled around a name, Edgar Bones. His breath hitched. Finch's face remained placid. He read the dry report. Multiple magical signatures detected at the Bones family home the night after the confirmed massacre. One matched Edgar. The others were unidentifiable, possibly layered with confounding charms. The official conclusion: residual magical echo from traumatic event. Case closed. Harry's mind raced. Edgar Bones had returned to the ruins of his home after his family was killed. He hadn't vanished from grief. He'd met someone there. Someone using powerful concealment charms. He carefully noted the file number. As he slid it back onto the shelf, a shadow fell over him. "You're new." The voice was crisp, female, with no warmth. Harry looked up, Finch's expression politely vacant. The witch was in her 40s, sharp-featured, with dark hair pulled into a severe bun. Her robes were impeccably cut, her posture rigid. Her aura was not powerful in a raw sense, but it was precise, like a scalpel. This was a woman who noticed details. Her eyes, a cold gray, scanned his visitor badge, his desk, his face. "Finch, ma'am. Temporary archival review. From the ARSC," he said, his voice perfectly bland. "The ARSC," she repeated, as if tasting a dubious piece of fruit. "I am Dolores Umbridge, Senior Undersecretary to the Minister. I was not informed of any interdepartmental review." Her smile was small and didn't reach her eyes. It was the smile of a cat who has found a mouse in a place mice shouldn't be. This was it. The test. Harry felt a cold trickle of fear, but he didn't let it touch Finch. Finch was mildly confused, slightly intimidated by authority, but fundamentally boring. I have the paperwork here somewhere, ma'am," Finch said, fumbling with a stack of forms on his desk. He pulled out a sheet Addie had forged, complete with fake signatures and official-looking stamps. It was a masterpiece of meaningless bureaucracy. Umbridge took it, her eyes scanning. Her magic extended, a fine, probing needle. Harry felt it brush against his wards, against the papery drone of Finch's signature. He reinforced it instinctively, thinking of dust, of filing cabinets, of endless, dull afternoons. He was void of interest. The probe lingered. It wasn't trying to break through, it was testing for consistency. For a lie. Archival review, she mused, her voice sickly sweet. How thorough. And what, precisely, are you reviewing, Mr. Finch? Cross-referencing accident reports with post-war infrastructure repair grants, ma'am, Harry said, repeating the cover story they'd concocted. Ensuring there's no duplication of claims. It was the kind of mind-numbingly pointless work the ministry would absolutely create. Umbridge's smile tightened. She clearly found him and his task beneath contempt, which was exactly the goal. But her eyes, those cold, piggy eyes, held his for a second too long. She was a woman who enjoyed the exercise of power, even over a nobody. "I see. Well, do be sure not to misfile anything. The ministry's records are a testament to our orderly society." She handed the paper back as if it were soiled. "Carry on." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the stone floor. Harry held Finch's posture until she was out of sight. Only then did he allow himself a minute, internal shudder. That had been close. Too close. Her magic had been like a thin, cold blade searching for a gap in his armor. He couldn't push his luck. He had his thread, the Edgar Bones report. It was time to leave. The rest of the afternoon was an eternity of performed normality. At exactly 4:55 p.m., Finch tidied his desk, nodded goodbye to no one in particular, and took the lift back to the atrium. He dropped his visitor badge into the returns box and stepped out into the fading daylight of London. He walked 3 blocks, turned into an alley, and leaned against the damp brick, letting the Finch disguise dissolve. The return to himself was a wave of nausea and profound relief. He was Harry again, small, shivering, his head pounding as if it had been used as an anvil. But in his mind, the information gleamed. Edgar Bones. Yorkshire. Confounding charms. After the massacre. Asterisk. He activated the portkey, a cheap bureau, and felt the hook behind his navel. He landed in the back room of Obscurus Books, stumbling into Addie's waiting arms. Umbridge, he gasped, as she poured a vial of restorative potion down his throat. The vial taste cleared the pounding in his head. She checked me. But I was, boring enough. Addie's face was pale. Dolores Umbridge. A vile, dangerous woman with a heart of filing cards and cruelty. You were lucky. She listened as he told her about the Bones file, her eyes widening. He went back, she whispered. He met someone. Someone hiding. A Death Eater. Checking the scene. Harry asked, his strength returning. Perhaps. Or, Addie's gaze grew distant. Or someone from the Order, trying to make contact. A trap. A rescue gone wrong. She shook her head. It's another thread. But Harry, this is getting dangerous. Umbridge is not like Fig. She is ambitious and paranoid. If she has the slightest suspicion. We'll be more careful, Harry said, but his mind was already racing ahead. They had 2 threads now. Dearborn's flask, Bones's return. Both pointed to disappearances that weren't clean. They pointed to stories. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat at his desk, the stolen data swirling in his mind. He wasn't just a boy hiding anymore. He had infiltrated the very heart of the magical government and stolen a secret. The thrill of it was a dark, potent energy. It was better than any wand magic. It was power born of nerve and deception. But as he looked at his reflection in the dark window, his own face, tired, young, scarred, he saw a ghost lurking behind his eyes. The ghost of Finch, of Megan Jones, of all the faces yet to come. He was becoming a machine for harvesting secrets, a ghost who walked through walls of bureaucracy and lies. Was this what Alfred had become? A collection of useful lies until the truth underneath wore thin. He thought of the Weasleys, their loud, messy love. That was a different kind of magic, one he couldn't mimic, couldn't infiltrate. He pushed the thought away. That path was closed to him. His path was here, in the shadows, connecting dots the world had forgotten. He opened a new page in his ledger. At the top, he wrote, Operation Wraith. And beneath, he began to outline a plan, not just to find one lost man, but to map the hidden geography of the war's unresolved echoes. He would use the Ministry's own records against them. He would be a ghost in their machine, silent, unseen, pulling at the threads of their complacency until the whole, buried tapestry began to unravel. The path was dark, and it led away from platforms and trains and the laughter of red-haired families. It led into filing cabinets and cold memories and the sharp, suspicious eyes of women like Umbridge. Harry Potter looked at his reflection, at the ghost of Finch in his eyes, and made his choice. He would follow the threads. Wherever they led. Chapter 11, The Map of Missing Things. The Yorkshire moors in late autumn were a study in desolation. A vast, rolling expanse of bronze and dun, where the wind had a voice, a low, constant keening that spoke of loneliness and buried bones. It was not a welcoming place. It was a place for secrets. Harry, disguised as a rambler named Oliver, felt the landscape's indifference like a physical pressure. Oliver was a muggle, equipped with a large-scale ordnance survey map, a heavy knapsack, and an earnest, slightly foolish passion for Neolithic stone circles. His magical signature was not just muted, it was absent, a perfect nullity Addie had achieved by weaving a complex, permanent *suppresso magicae charm into a simple woolen hat he wore. To any magical detection, he was a blank. A hole in the world. It was a strange, hollow feeling, like being deaf to a constant, familiar hum. He'd been traveling for 2 days, using muggle trains and buses, following the coordinates Addie had painstakingly triangulated from the Ministry's dry report. The location of the Bones family massacre. It was not marked on any map. The magical community had sealed it, sanitized it, then turned its collective back, eager to forget. But the land remembered. He found it as the weak afternoon sun bled into the horizon. There was no house, not even ruins. The land itself had been scoured, leaving a shallow, bowl-like depression in the earth, covered now in tough, gray grass that grew in twisted clumps. The air was still, too still. The wind's voice died at the edge of the depression, as if afraid to enter. Harry as Oliver stood at the perimeter, consulting his map with feigned confusion. His muggle eyes saw only odd geology. But his senses, trained by Addie and honed by his own strange magic, felt the echoes. Not of pain or sorrow, those were human emotions, long faded. This was a scar on the magical fabric of the place. A ragged tear, poorly mended. The official report had called it, residual magical echo. Standing here, Harry knew that was a lie, or a profound misunderstanding. This wasn't an echo. It was a stain. A dark, sticky residue of spellwork so violent it had cauterized the land's own innate magic. He walked slowly into the depression, his boots silent on the brittle grass. He closed his eyes, dropping Oliver's simple-minded facade and reaching out with the part of him that was purely Harry, the Metamorphmagus, the sensitive. He wasn't looking for ghosts. He was looking for fingerprints. He found them at the center, where the hearth of the house would have been. Not one, but several magical signatures, layered over each other in a frantic, violent palimpsest. The newest were Ministry standard, clean, bureaucratic spells for containment and cleanup. Beneath those, a chaotic swirl of agony and terror, the spells that had ended lives. And beneath that, almost buried but unmistakable to his seeking senses, two more. One was a familiar, sorrowful thrum he instinctively recognized from Addie's description, Edgar Bones. It was shattered, pulsing with grief so profound it had a magical weight. It lingered here, a heartbroken anchor. And the other, this was what he'd come for. This signature was a masterwork of obscurity. It was layered, like his own disguises, but with a cold, surgical precision. It had three distinct strata: a surface layer mimicking the chaotic violence of the killing spells, a middle layer of utter, dead nullity like his own suppresso charm, but far more advanced, and at its core, a faint, cold, metallic pulse that felt hungry. It was the signature of a predator who knew how to hide its tracks. This was the unidentifiable, possibly confounded, signature from the report. To the Ministry's blunt instruments, it had been noise. To Harry, it was a signature with a personality. Cautious, intelligent, cruel. Edgar Bones had come here, drawn by his shattered heart. And this predator had been waiting. Or had followed. Harry opened his eyes, the bleak twilight settling around him. The story was clearer, and darker. This wasn't a random ambush. It was a meeting, a trap for a grieving man. He spent an hour methodically scanning the perimeter, using techniques Addie had taught him from a book on magical forensics. He found a place where the grass, even years later, grew slightly greener, fed by a tiny, persistent leak of magic, a place where someone had stood for a long time, watching the house. A sniper's perch, but for magic. He was gathering dirt samples, a cover for Oliver the geologist, when a new sound cut through the silence. Not the wind. An engine. A low, grumbling purr. A motorbike, massive and black, crested a rise and came to a stop at the edge of the depression. The rider dismounted, a mountain of a man in leathers, his face hidden by a helmet. He moved with a surprising, lethal grace for his size, his head turning slowly, scanning the area. Harry froze, his null field perfect. He was Oliver, a harmless muggle. He waved, a friendly, clueless gesture. The man ignored him, striding to the center of the depression. He removed his helmet. Harry's breath caught in his throat. It was the man from Diagon Alley. The big, black-haired, black-bearded man who had bellowed for Dumbledore. The one radiating raw, chaotic power. Up close, he was even more formidable. His face was rugged, scarred, and currently etched with a deep, personal anguish. He wasn't here on ministry business. He was here to grieve. The man, Addie had named him, Hagrid, Rubeus Hagrid, keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts, knelt in the center, one massive hand pressing into the earth. He murmured something, a low rumble lost in the wind. A single, fat tear traced a path through his beard. He wasn't a threat. He was a fellow mourner. A connection to the world Harry was investigating, standing right there. The temptation was immense. To drop the disguise, to ask, did you know him? What was he like? To have a conversation, a real one, with someone from that other life. But Hagrid was also Dumbledore's man. Loyal to the core. And Dumbledore's piercing blue eyes were a warning Harry couldn't ignore. Revealing himself here, now, would unravel everything. So he remained Oliver. He packed his samples, shouldered his pack, and began to walk away, giving the grieving giant a wide berth. He hadn't taken 5 steps when Hagrid's voice, rough with emotion, stopped him. "Yay, all right there." Harry turned. Hagrid was looking at him now, his beetle black eyes sharp despite the tears. "Fine, thanks," Harry said, layering Oliver's faint northern accent thick. "Just a bit turned around. The map's not much use out here." Hagrid nodded, his gaze sweeping over Harry with an appraisal that was more than casual. It was the look of a man who spent his life with dangerous creatures, assessing threat and truth. "Not a place fair tourists, this. Bad history. I gathered," Harry said, aiming for polite disinterest. "Feels odd." "Ye could say that," Hagrid muttered. He took a step closer. "Ye haven't seen anything strange, have ye? Sides the odd feel of it. A test, or genuine inquiry?" Harry shook his head. "Just the wind and the sheep. And your bike. That's a beauty." For a second, Hagrid's grief lifted, replaced by a flash of pride. "Aye, she is. Modified her myself." Then the sorrow returned, heavier. "Ye should head on. Gets dark fast. And some things, best left in the dark." It was a dismissal, and a warning. Harry nodded, offering a final, bland smile before turning and walking briskly towards the road. He could feel Hagrid's eyes on his back until he crested the hill and was out of sight. The encounter left him rattled. He had been inches from a real connection, a source of information he craved. But the risk, Hagrid's instinct had been to probe, to assess. He was more perceptive than his appearance suggested. Back in the dingy bed and breakfast in the nearest village, Harry let the Oliver disguise drop. He sat on the narrow bed, Ember smuggled in his knapsack, purring on his lap, and stared at his notes. He had 2 concrete data points now, the Predator's cold, layered signature, and Hagrid's personal, painful vigil. He sketched the signature as he'd felt it, a triple-layered sphere with a cold core. He labeled it, Signature X. The next phase of Operation Wraith required a different approach. He needed to cross-reference Signature X with other locations, other disappearances. But how, without endless, risky field trips? The answer came from an unexpected fusion of his 2 worlds, Muggle technology and magical theory. In a public library in York, using a computer for the first time, a bewildering, fascinating machine, he learned about geographic profiling, a method used by police to predict a criminal's base of operations by mapping connected crime scenes. It was about patterns in space. Could magical signatures leave a geographic pattern? He spent a week in the library, hunched over printouts and old maps, using the stolen ministry file numbers to locate the last known locations of 6 other missing Order members or suspected sympathizers. He plotted them on a map of Britain. They seemed random, a coastal village, a city flat, a remote farm. Then, he overlaid a map of known ley lines, the currents of raw magical energy that flowed beneath the land, which Addie had diagrams of. 3 of the locations sat on or near minor ley line junctions. 2 more were within a mile of powerful, natural magical foci, ancient stone circles, druid groves. And the Bones house, it sat directly atop a faint, but documented, ley line spur. It wasn't proof, but it was a hypothesis. Signature X was hunting in places of magical resonance. Perhaps they needed the ambient energy to mask their own complex spellwork. Or perhaps they were drawn to it, like a shark to blood in the water. He needed a third point of data to confirm the pattern. He found it in the file of Dorcas Meadows, a witch who had vanished from her home in the Scottish borders. Her cottage was noted to be built upon a reputed fairy mound, a classic magical convergence point. Operation Wraith now had a target profile, not a person, but a hunting ground. He returned to London, his mind buzzing. Addie listened to his report, her face growing graver with each detail. "A signature hunter," she murmured, tracing the sketch of Signature X. "Using the land's own magic as a cloak. This is highly sophisticated. Dark arts of a caliber we haven't seen since the war. This isn't a leftover Death Eater thug. This is an artisan. And they're still active," Harry said, the realization chilling him. The Bones file was from 81. But if this is their method, there could be others, more recent, not connected to the war. Missing people the ministry writes off as traveling, or moving abroad. Addie nodded slowly. You're suggesting we set a watch. Not look for the hunter, but watch the places they hunt. We set a trap for a ghost, Harry said. Using the map of missing things. The plan was born of equal parts brilliance and madness. They couldn't watch every magical convergence in Britain. But they could choose one. A place with the right resonance, but one that was currently empty, not tied to a known disappearance, to avoid walking into an active hunt. They chose a place in Wales, a wooded valley with a documented, thin, place in the Vale, not powerful enough to attract serious magical attention, but perfect for their purposes. Using Addie's extensive collection of defensive and observational artifacts, they would create a magical surveillance post. Not to ambush the hunter, but to observe, to capture their signature in the act, to finally get a clear look at the predator in the dark. It would take months to prepare. They needed wards that were invisible even to this level of hunter, recording crystals that could capture magical signatures, escape routes, safe houses. As they began the meticulous work, Harry felt a shift within himself. He was no longer just a boy searching for lost heroes. He was a hunter of a hunter. The shadows he lived in had depth now, contours, and a dangerous, intelligent occupant. One evening, as he was enchanting a piece of quartz to vibrate in the presence of a triple-layered signature, Addie placed a hand on his shoulder. You know, she said quietly, this path you're on, it's taking you further from any chance of a normal life. Even a normal wizarding life. He didn't look up from his work. There was never a normal life for me, Addie. The cupboard wasn't normal. Hiding isn't normal. This, he gestured at the map covered in pins and lines, at the glowing crystal. This feels real. It feels like I'm using what I am, instead of just hiding it. You are, she agreed, her voice thick. But it will leave marks, Harry. Different ones than the cupboard. Invisible ones. He finally met her gaze. In his green eyes, she saw no childish fear, only a weary, resolute clarity that belonged to someone much older. I'd rather have marks from fighting, he said, than from just lying down and taking it. She had no answer to that. Later, under the skylight, Harry looked at the map on his wall. It was no longer a map of Britain. It was a map of a secret war, one that had never ended. His pins were not just for the missing, they were bait. And they were a promise. He was Harry Potter, the boy who lived in the cracks of the world. He was the mapmaker of missing things. He was the ghost learning to hunt other ghosts. And somewhere out there in the dark, Signature X was moving, a cold, hungry pulse drawn to places of power. Waiting for them, or waiting for him. The game was on, and for the first time, Harry felt not like a pawn, but like a player on the board, moving his own pieces in the silent, deadly dark. Chapter 12, The Valley of Vales. The Welsh Valley didn't have a name on any magical map. To the local muggles, it was Cwm Drag, Dragon Valley, named for the strange, twisting rock formations that clawed at the sky. To Addie's older, darker texts, it was referred to as Ye Tywil, the dark place, not for evil, but for the profound, velvety silence that pooled in its depths, a natural dampener for magical sound and light. It was a place where the world's seams were worn thin. Perfect for a ghost to watch for ghosts. The preparation had taken 4 months. 4 months of intricate, exhausting work. Harry had mastered the creation of permanent, passive observational charms, etching tiny, self-sustaining rune arrays onto river stones and tree bark. He'd learned to weave wards that mimicked the valley's own magical dampening field, making their additions indistinguishable from the background hum. Addie had raided her deepest vaults for artifacts, a set of Peruvian smoke sensors that could capture a magical signature in ectoplasmic residue, a silent bell that would toll in their hidden camp if a preset signature pattern crossed its range. Their base was not a tent, but a pocket. A magically expanded space inside a large, moss-covered boulder, accessed by pressing a specific sequence of lichen patches. Inside, it was a snug, single room lined with shelves of monitoring equipment, a small cooking hearth, and 2 cots. It was cramped, damp, and felt like the most advanced fortress in the world. Harry's identity for the duration was Gwillem, a local farm boy with a faint, muddy trace of magic, a squib plus, enough to explain his presence in a magical place to any curious searcher, but not enough to be noteworthy. Gwillem was slow of speech, fascinated by birds, and carried a sketchbook everywhere. It was a comfortable, undemanding mask to wear for weeks on end. The routine was monastic. Dawn, check the smoke sensors for overnight residue. Morning, a long, slow patrol along a preset grid, replacing observation stones, listening with every sense for disturbances in the valley's quiet song. Afternoon, maintenance on the wards, studying the magical topography. Evening, reviewing the day's data, which was always, frustratingly, blank. Nothing. No signature X. No unusual magical traffic. Just the slow, deep pulse of the land itself and the occasional flare of a passing magical creature. A glimmering asterisk hinky punk asterisk, a distant, mournful asterisk seen ANNWN asterisk call. The silence was profound, the waiting, agonizing. Harry's anchor days were impossible here. There was no break from the mission, from the identity of Gwillem, from the constant, low-level vigilance. Ember, at least, was in her element, stalking through the ferns like a miniature, ginger leopard. She was his touchstone, her simple needs pulling him out of his own circling thoughts. The thoughts were the hardest part. In the vast, empty silence of the valley, his mind had nowhere to hide. Memories of the Dursleys felt distant, almost academic. The thrill of the Ministry infiltration had faded. What remained was the grinding reality of the hunt. Cold, damp, boredom, and the gnawing fear that they were wrong, that signature X was a phantom, that he was wasting his life in a muddy hole for nothing. He took to walking at twilight, the time of day when the veil was said to be thinnest. As Gwillem, he'd climb to a high ridge and watch the shadows swallow the valley below. In these moments, he'd let the boy's simple persona slip, not to become Harry, but to exist in the quiet space between identities. He'd feel his own core, not as a tool to be shaped, but as a presence. A lonely, watchful star in the deepening dark. It was on one such evening, 3 weeks into their vigil, that the valley spoke. He was on the ridge, Ember beside him, when the silence changed. It wasn't a sound, but a cessation. The usual background hum of insects, the sigh of the wind through the dragon claw rocks, it all died, as if the world was holding its breath. The hair on his arms and the back of his neck stood up. Ember went rigid, a low growl vibrating in her throat. Then, from the deepest part of the CWM, where a small, black mirror lay like a drop of ink, a light bloomed. Not a friendly light. It was a cold, phosphorescent green, the color of poisoned lichen, of deep-sea things. It pulsed once, weakly, then vanished. The silent bell in their pocket camp did not toll. The signature was wrong. This wasn't X. This was something else. Harry was moving before his conscious mind caught up, slipping down the slope with a fluid, silent grace Gwillem the farm boy shouldn't possess. He reached the tree line above the mere and froze. The water was still, black, and perfectly reflective. On its far bank, a figure knelt. It was a woman, or had been. Her form was translucent, shimmering with that same sickly green light. She wore robes that might once have been fine, now tattered and dripping with phantom lake weed. Her face was turned towards the water, but he could see her profile, gaunt, elegant, etched with an eternal, silent scream. A ghost, but not like any ghost described in Addie's books. This one wasn't haunting a place, it was trapped in a ritual space. The mirror wasn't water, it was a basin of concentrated dark magic, a prison. As he watched, the ghost woman raised a trembling, spectral hand. Instead of passing through it, her fingers touched the surface of the black water. Where they met, the green light flared, and the water rippled not with weight, but with pain. A silent wave of anguish, cold and sharp as broken glass, radiated outwards. Harry gasped, the emotion hitting him like a physical blow. It was despair so absolute it had curdled into a kind of passive, endless suffering. This was no natural death. This was an atrocity, preserved. The ghost lowered her hand, the light fading. The valley's normal sounds rushed back in, as if a door had been closed. She remained, a silent, grieving sentinel over the black mirror. Harry retreated to the camp, his heart hammering. He found Addie calibrating a smoke sensor. He described what he'd seen, the unnatural light, the silent scream, the wave of magical agony. Addie's face lost all color. A cauldron-born spirit, she whispered, the term archaic and foul on her tongue. Not a ghost who cannot move on. A soul bound to a place of dark power, its suffering used to fuel something. A ward, a beacon, a battery. It's necromancy of the most vile sort. Banned even before the international statute of secrecy. Who is she? Harry asked, the image of the elegant, tormented face seared into his mind. Addie consulted her notes, her hands shaking. The valley, records say a minor Welsh noble family, magical, lived here centuries ago. The last heiress, a witch known for her skill with water magic, she disappeared. Rumored to have drowned in the mere. This is not drowning. She's the focus, Harry realized, the pieces clicking together with a cold, logical horror. The ley line convergence here. They didn't just use the place's magic. They added to it. With her pain, it amplifies the natural dampening field, makes it a perfect hiding place for dark work. A silent, screaming alarm system that feels like part of the landscape. Addie stared at him, her amethyst eyes wide with a new kind of fear. You're saying Signature X didn't just find this place. They helped create it. Or someone before them did. And they're using it. The hunt had just become infinitely more dangerous. They weren't just watching a hunting ground. They were sitting in the lair of a monster who practiced arts that made the killing curse look merciful. That night, sleep was impossible. The weight of the bound spirit's despair pressed on the camp. Harry lay in his cot, listening to the now ominous silence of the valley. He thought of the ghost woman's hand touching the water, the ripple of pain. She had been someone. A person with a name, a life, magic of her own. Reduced to a tool, a source of misery to power a hiding place. His own mission felt suddenly small, selfish. He was here to solve a puzzle, to prove his own cleverness, to find lost order members. But this was a wrong that was active, ongoing. A soul in torment, right outside his door. The next day, he went back to the ridge, not as Gwillem, but as himself. He didn't approach the mirror. He sat at a distance, and he looked. Not with his magical senses probing, but simply observing. He watched the ghost through the day. She moved through a silent, agonized routine, kneeling, touching the water, flinching at the pain, fading slightly, then reforming to do it again. A perpetual, hellish cycle. He began to sketch her in his book, not as a magical phenomenon, but as a person. The line of her jaw, the fall of her spectral hair, the elegant arch of her neck now bent in sorrow. He gave her a name, plucked from a half-remembered Welsh history text Addie had, Caris. He couldn't free her. The magic binding her was ancient, complex, and undoubtedly booby-trapped. To attempt it would be to scream their presence to Signature X, whoever they were. But he could witness her. He could remember that she was Caris, not just a cauldron born. It felt like the smallest, most pathetic rebellion. But it was something. The vigil continued, but the atmosphere had changed. The valley was no longer just a site of potential discovery, it was a tomb, and they were sharing it with its unwilling guardian. The data they collected was no longer abstract. Every silent hour, every blank sensor, was an hour Caris spent in her cycle of pain. The waiting became a kind of mourning. Then, 6 weeks in, the silent bell tolled. It was a sound felt in the bones, not the ears. A single, deep, vibrational gong that shook the teacups on their shelf. Harry and Addie froze, staring at the bell where it hung from the ceiling. Its clapper was still, but the magical resonance in the room was unmistakable. Something with a triple-layered magical signature had just entered the valley. Signature X was here. All fatigue, all existential dread, vanished, burned away by a surge of pure, crystalline focus. The hunt was on. Harry became Gwillem in an instant, his face settling into the boy's placid expression, his magic withdrawing to that faint, muddy trace. Addie activated the central monitoring crystal, which began to project a shimmering, three-dimensional map of the valley onto the stone wall. A single, pulsing dot of cold blue light had appeared at the northern entrance, moving slowly, purposefully, along the ley line. They watched, breath held. The dot moved with confident, unhurried precision. It didn't deviate towards their camp or the mere. It headed straight for the dragon claw rocks at the valley's heart, the most powerful natural focus. They're not hunting, Addie breathed. They're checking maintenance. On the screen, they saw the blue dot stop at the base of the largest rock. Then, something extraordinary happened. The signature on the monitor began to unfold. The 3 layers peeled apart visually, the outer masking layer dissolving, the middle nullity layer stabilizing, and the inner, cold core, it reached out. A thin, precise thread of magic, depicted as a fine silver line on their map, extended from Signature X towards the Black Mirror, miles away. It didn't go to the water. It went to the space above it, where Karis's tortured spirit would be. The thread connected. On the map, a second point ignited, a sickly, pulsing green dot where the ghost was bound. Signature X wasn't just using the valley. They were tending the atrocity. Reinforcing the bonds. Harvesting the amplified magical resonance. Harry felt a cold rage, cleaner and sharper than any he'd ever known. This wasn't about survival or puzzles anymore. He was watching a gardener prune a hellish plant. The connection held for 10 minutes. The silver thread thrummed, drawing the amplified, pain-soaked magic from the mirror back towards Signature X. Then, it severed. The blue dot's signature refolded, layers snapping back into their concealing order. It began to move back the way it came. They were leaving. Their check was complete. "We have them," Addie whispered, her voice trembling with fury and triumph. A clear signature. A pattern. A location they returned to. Harry said nothing. He watched the blue dot retreat on the map, a cold, efficient predator satisfied with its larder. He looked from the dot to the green pulse that was Karis, bound and suffering. He had the data. Operation Wraith was a success. But as he stood in the silent, stone room, the map of light on the wall, he knew the mission had just changed irrevocably. It was no longer about finding the missing. It was about stopping the monster who made them disappear. And the first step to doing that, he knew with a certainty that settled in his bones like frost, was to find a way to shatter a black mirror and silence a scream that had lasted for centuries. The ghost in the machine had a face now, and a name. And Harry Potter, the boy with 1,000 faces, would not let her pain be in vain. Chapter 13, A Crack in the Mask. The return from Wales was a journey into a different kind of silence. The cramped, familiar warmth of obscurus books felt like a museum after the raw, living dread of the valley. The scent of old paper and tea was now undercut, in Harry's mind, by the phantom smell of damp stone and despair. He carried the valley with him, a cold weight in his chest where the image of Karis, hand outstretched over the black mirror, was now permanently etched. The data was a triumph. They had a perfect, multi-layered capture of Signature X's magical fingerprint. They had geographic patterns, a modus operandi, evidence of ongoing, sophisticated dark arts. Addie spent days in a frenzy of analysis, cross-referencing the signature with every dark text, every known Death Eater's known proclivities. She found partial matches, a masking technique used by a vanished Death Eater spy, a null field similar to one developed by a reclusive Albanian blood mage, but no perfect fit. Signature X was a chimera, a composite of the worst kinds of magical cunning. Harry, however, was not in the back room with the books. He was in his loft, staring at the sketch of Karis. He had drawn her from memory, the spectral lines hesitant, trying to capture not just her torment, but the ghost of the dignity that must have preceded it. The parchment seemed to hum with a faint, residual ache. The success of Operation Wraith felt like ashes. They had identified a predator, but the predator was still out there, tending its garden of sorrow. And they had left a soul in torment as bait. "We can't free her yet," Addie had said, her voice heavy with regret. The binding is tied to the ley line and to X's reinforcement rituals. Attempting a severance would be like yanking a tripwire. They'd know. They'd come. So they waited. They planned. The next phase was to use the signature to trawl through other cold cases, to build a timeline of X's activities. It was logical, meticulous, safe. Harry felt like he was suffocating. The carefully constructed compartments of his life began to leak. During an occlumency drill, the quiet pool of his mind rippled not with memories of the cupboard, but with the cold green pulse of the mirror. While practicing a shift into Leo Cresswell, his own face in the mirror seemed to blur for a second, the features thinning, becoming gaunt and translucent. He snapped back to himself with a gasp, his heart hammering. He was internalizing the ghost. The horror was seeping into his magic. He needed an outlet, a direction for the furious, helpless energy coiling inside him. He found it, not in grand plans, but in a quiet, stubborn act of rebellion. He began to research not how to break a cauldron-born binding, but how to communicate with a bound spirit. It was a niche, near impossible branch of magic. Most ghosts were echoes, repetitive, trapped in their moment of death. A spirit deliberately bound and tortured would be incoherent, its consciousness shredded into raw sensation. But he had felt her pain. It had a texture, a terrible clarity. There was someone still in there, drowning. In a forgotten grimoire titled Whispers from the Veil, he found a reference to echo song, a method used by ancient Celtic seers. It didn't involve words or spells, but resonance. A witch or wizard could, by aligning their own magical core to the specific frequency of a spirit's enduring emotion, its grief, its love, its rage, create a bridge of pure feeling. It was a dangerous practice. You risked being swept away by the emotion, losing yourself in another's trauma. It was perfect. He wouldn't be breaking the binding. He would be listening, acknowledging. The magical footprint would be minuscule, a whisper lost in the valley's own dampening field. And if X was monitoring the mirror for disruptions, a brief surge of shared sorrow might register as nothing more than a slight intensification of the ghost's own suffering. He didn't tell Addie. She would forbid it. It was reckless, emotional, and offered no tactical advantage. But for Harry, it was the only move that felt human. He prepared for a week. He honed his occlumency until his mind was a still, deep lake, capable of holding vast emotion without being overwhelmed by it. He practiced modulating his own core's output, not to mimic another's signature, but to vibrate at a specific emotional pitch, first his own loneliness from the cupboard days, then the fierce, protective love he felt for Ember. It was a strange, intimate magic, tuning his soul like an instrument. He told Addie he was going on a solo, fieldcraft, exercise to a London park, to practice maintaining a disguise in a crowded Muggle setting. She approved, distracted by her signature analysis. He went to Wales instead. Not to the camp, but to the ridge overlooking the mere. He went as Gwillem, the farm boy, his magical presence a nullity. The valley was in its usual state of hushed dread. He could see Karis from his vantage point, a faint green smudge against the black water. He sat, cross-legged, on the cold earth. He closed his eyes. He found his quiet place, the still pool. Then, carefully, he reached for the memory of the wave of despair that had hit him when she touched the water. He didn't just remember it, he refelt it. The cold, sharp glass of it. The absolute, hollowed-out hopelessness. Holding that feeling in a separate compartment of his mind, he then reached for his own core. He gently nudged its frequency, not to match the feeling exactly, but to harmonize with it. To create a note of recognition. I feel this too. Asterisk. He let the note go. A single, pure, silent chord of shared sorrow, flowing from him down the slope towards the mere. For a long moment, nothing. Just the wind and the distant, ever-present ache of the place. Then, a change. The green glow at the mere didn't intensify. It shimmered. The rigid, agonized posture of the ghostly figure seemed to soften, just a fraction. Her head, which was always bowed towards the water, lifted slightly. And a feeling washed back up the hill towards him. Not the shattered, chaotic pain of before. This was a single, clear, unmistakable emotion, surprise. Followed by a question, wordless, carried on a current of anguish so old it had become a landscape. Who? Tears streamed down Harry's face, hot against the cold air. He hadn't realized he was crying. He sent back another pulse, not of sorrow this time, but of the feeling he'd practiced, fierce, protective love. The feeling he had for Ember, for Addie, even for the parents he'd never known. A feeling that defied the darkness. Friend, asterisk 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 he sent back, the concept woven into the emotional resonance. The connection lasted only seconds. The surprise from the mere faded, replaced by a surge of the old, grinding pain, as if the binding had reasserted its grip. But in its wake, for one fleeting moment, there had been a crack in the endless torment. A moment of contact. Harry broke the link, shuddering. He felt drained, hollowed out, as if he'd cried for hours. But beneath the exhaustion was a wild, fragile hope. She was in there, Karis, and she knew she was not completely alone. He made the journey back to London in a daze, the echo of that single, surprised emotion replaying in his mind. It was the most important magic he had ever done. He returned to find Addie in a state of controlled panic. "Where have you been?" she demanded, her face pale. The park surveillance was clear, you never arrived. He was too emotionally raw to craft a good lie. "Wales," he said simply, slumping into a chair. Ember leapt into his lap, purring anxiously. Addie's eyes widened in horror. She listened, her expression moving from fury to fear to a dawning, awful understanding as he told her what he'd done. "You foolish, brilliant, reckless boy," she breathed, sinking into the chair opposite him. "The risk, if they had detected that." "They didn't," Harry said, his voice quiet but firm. It was a whisper. And it worked. She's aware, Addie. She's trapped, but she's still there. Addie stared at him, seeing not just the determined set of his jaw, but the tear tracks dried on his cheeks, the new depth of sorrow in his green eyes. He had looked into the abyss, and instead of turning away, he had sunk to it. The cost was written on him. You opened a door to her pain, Addie said softly. You can't close that now. It's in you. I know, Harry said. I can carry it. That night, the nightmares changed. They were no longer about cupboards or green light. He dreamed he was standing in the black mirror, the water thick and cold as liquid night. Karis stood before him, not as a ghost, but as a living woman with kind, tired eyes and water magic sparkling at her fingertips. She smiled, and then the water rose, swallowing her, and he felt the binding snap into place around his own core, cold and final, and he woke choking on a silent scream, the taste of peat and despair in his mouth. He began to have waking flashes, a sudden chill, a fleeting sense of drowning in daylight. The crack he'd opened worked both ways. He was sharing her prison, in tiny, psychic shards. It should have broken him. Instead, it focused him with a laser's intensity. The theoretical fight against Signature X was now personal. It was about Karis. It was about the ghost pain echoing in his own bones. He threw himself back into the research with Addie, but with a new, cold fury. He wasn't just looking for a pattern, he was looking for a weakness. He started cross-referencing X's signature with known counters to necromantic bindings, with leyline disruption theory, with the magical properties of the specific plants growing around the mirror. One afternoon, buried in a tome on geomancy, he found a passing reference. A spirit bound by water and stone may find its chains weakened not by force but by diversion. As a river may be coaxed to a new bed, so may the flows that feed a dark construct be tempted. Diversion. Not breaking the binding, but redirecting the magical energy that sustained it. If they could subtly alter the flow of the ley line spur under the mirror, even for a few minutes, the binding might flicker. Karis might have a moment of clarity. Long enough, perhaps, to tell them something. A name. A memory of her captor. It was 1,000 times more complex than Echo's song. It would require manipulating the land's magic on a fundamental level. It was the kind of magic that took teams of trained ward breakers weeks to plan. They had only each other, a stolen library, and a fierce, desperate need. As they began the monumental calculations, Harry felt the ghost inside him settle, not as a torment, but as a resolve. The cold weight in his chest was no longer just despair. It was a compass needle, pointing unerringly towards the heart of the darkness. He was Harry Potter, the boy who spoke to ghosts. He was the crack in the mask of eternal suffering. He had shared a moment of surprise with a soul lost in time, and in doing so, had found a new reason to fight. The path ahead was darker and more dangerous than any that had come before. He was no longer just hiding, or hunting. He was preparing for a rescue mission into a fortress of pain, and the key was not a spell or a weapon, but the fragile, defiant connection he had forged with a woman who had been drowning for centuries. He looked at Addie, bent over her diagrams, her white and purple hair a splash of color in the dim room. He looked at Ember, sleeping in a pool of sunlight. He felt the echo of Karis's surprise in his heart. He had people to protect. All of them. And for the first time, the boy with 1,000 faces knew exactly who he was underneath them all. He was the one who would not look away. Chapter 14, The Ley Line Gambit. Winter gripped London with iron teeth, but inside obscurest books, the air was thick with a different kind of frost, the chill of complex magical equations and simmering dread. The loft was now a war room. Parchment maps of the Welsh Valley were pinned to every vertical surface, covered in arcane symbols, flow arrows, and anxious notes. The elegant lines of the ley lines were traced in silver ink, the black mirror a blot of indigo, and the dragon claw rocks marked with crimson runes denoting, anchoring nodes. The plan, born from Harry's geomancy text, was called the ley line gambit. It was simple in concept, suicidal in execution. They would not attack Signature X's binding on Karis directly. Instead, they would perform magical surgery on the land itself. Using a precisely calibrated array of resonant crystals and their own combined magical will, they would create a temporary, subtle kink in the ley line spur that fed the mirror. Just a slight diversion of the magical current, for no more than 5 minutes. The theory was that the binding, reliant on that constant flow of earth magic amplified by Karis's pain, would stutter. Karis might experience a window of coherence. The risks were catastrophic. If they miscalculated the resonance, they could rupture the ley line, causing a magical backlash that would vaporize them and possibly trigger earthquakes for miles. If they were detected by Signature X during the attempt, they were dead. If the brief window of clarity drove Karis mad instead of freeing her mind, they would have tortured her further for nothing. Addie argued for more time, for consultants, for anything but this headlong rush. But Harry, with the ghost of Karis's surprise a constant, cold echo in his soul, was immovable. Every day they waited was another day of her torment. Every day was a chance that X would return and they would lose their opportunity. "We have the data," Harry said, his voice low and steady, pointing at the captured signature glowing in a containment sphere on the desk. "We know the valley's magical topography better than anyone alive. We have the element of surprise. And we have a reason." Addie looked at him, at the dark circles under eyes that had seen too much, at the set of a jaw that was no longer a child's. She saw not a boy playing at war, but a young man already scarred by a battle no one else knew was being fought. She nodded, once, the movement heavy with fate. The preparation was a ballet of precision. They needed 7 resonant crystals, each attuned to a specific harmonic of the valley's magic. Addie worked in the basement, a converted alchemy lab, her hands steady as she infused flawless quartz points with intricate webs of intent. Harry's job was to seed the valley. Over 3 clandestine trips as Gwillem, he placed the crystals in a wide, star-shaped pattern around the mirror, burying them in specific soil compositions, aligning them with the pull of certain stars. Each placement was a day's work, a nerve-wracking exercise in stealth. During the final seeding trip, as he was placing the last crystal, the keystone, near the base of a lightning-blasted oak, he felt it. A tremor in the magical fabric of the valley, a subtle tightening. He froze, his Gwillem mask flawless, his null field absolute. He looked towards the mirror. Karis was there, as always. But her posture was different. Not the usual bowed agony. She was upright, her spectral face turned not to the water, but towards the dragon claw rocks. Her form flickered, not with pain, but with attention. As if listening to a distant sound. Signature X was coming, or had just been. The valley felt watched. He finished his work and left, the cold certainty of impending collision settling in his gut. The night of the gambit arrived under a cloak of perfect, moonless black. They stood in their pocket camp, the cramped space humming with tension. Addie wore practical, dark robes, her hair bound back severely. Harry was not Gwillem tonight. He wore no complex disguise. He was simply himself, clad in black, his face pale and set, his scar a faint silver line in the gloom. For this, he needed every ounce of his own power, unfiltered. Ember, sensing the mood, had been left in London with a neighbor Addie trusted, a squib who ran a cat shelter and asked no questions. "Remember the sequence," Addie said, her voice a taut wire. "I will initiate the primary resonance from here, using the keystone crystal as the conductor. You will be at the anchor point at the blasted oak. Your job is to hold the connection, to be the human focus. You will feel the ley line's power. It will try to burn you out. Your occlumency must be perfect. You are a vessel, not a dam." Harry nodded. He had practiced the meditative state for weeks, holding a roaring river of imagined magic in the still pool of his mind. Theory was one thing. Reality, he knew, would be different. "If you feel the binding resist, if you feel any foreign magic probing, we abort," Addie insisted, grabbing his shoulders. "The emergency portkeys are tuned to different locations. We scatter. We survive to fight another day. We free her today," Harry said, and it was not bravado. It was a promise he had made in the dark, to Karis and to himself. They left the pocket camp, emerging into the profound, listening silence of the valley. The air was cold enough to hurt his lungs. They separated without another word, Addie moving to a hidden vantage point with a direct line of sight to the mirror, Harry ghosting through the trees to the blasted oak. He took his position, his back against the rough, dead bark. He closed his eyes, sinking instantly into his occlumency. The still pool was there, deep and calm. He opened his magical senses wide, feeling the valley not as a place, but as a body, the slow, deep thrum of the ley line like a subterranean artery, the poisonous knot of the mirror a festering wound, the 7 crystals he'd placed like acupuncture needles waiting for the healer's touch. A whisper of magic, feather-light and immensely precise, brushed against his awareness. Addie, beginning the invocation. One by one, the crystals awoke. He felt them, not as sounds, but as points of rising pressure in the magical field. A low C from the north. An E from the east. A G from the southwest. A chord of the earth itself, being tuned. The ley line, accustomed to its ancient, unthinking path, noticed the new music. He felt its attention, a vast, slow, geological curiosity. The pressure built. The still pool in his mind began to ripple. He steadied it, focusing on his breath, on the image of a channel, smooth and strong, directing the flow. Addie's magic shifted, a conductor bringing in the next instruments. The chord deepened, grew more complex. It was beautiful and terrifying, a symphony played on the bones of the world. And then, she plucked the string. A single, pure note of command, focused through the keystone crystal, shot into the ley line spur. The world jolted. It wasn't a physical earthquake. It was a magical one. The deep thrum under Harry's feet hitched, stuttered, then veered. He was the anchor. The diverted power, a torrent of raw, primal earth magic, slammed into him. It was fire and ice and weight and light. It was the mountain's patience and the river's relentless drive. It filled him, threatened to shred his consciousness, to burn out his core. He gritted his teeth, a silent scream trapped in his throat. He was the vessel. He held the still pool, even as a hurricane raged through it. The image of the smooth channel cracked, then reformed, stronger. He poured the energy through himself and back into the ground along the new, temporary pathway they had designed, a magical bypass around the mirror. At the center of the valley, the black mirror reacted. The inky water didn't ripple. It shivered, as if struck by a tuning fork. The sickly green glow emanating from Karis flickered, guttered, and for a second, went out. In that second of absolute, profound darkness, Harry felt a new connection snap into place. Not the echo of pain. This was a clear, desperate, focused thought, aimed directly at the anchor point, at him. The rocks, the thought voice of Karis was a dry rustle, the voice of a woman who had not spoken in centuries. He anchors it in the tallest claw, the heart stone, it drinks the pain. A flash of image accompanied it, not the dragon claw. Rocks as they were, but as they had been when she was alive, a place of power, of meditation. And hidden within the tallest, needle-like stone, a cavity. A dark, smooth stone pulsing with captured agony. Then, a wave of returning force. The binding, panicking at the loss of its food source, recoiled and lashed out. The green light slammed back into existence around Karis, brighter, more violent than before. A silent scream of re-engaged torment tore through the magical spectrum. And something else answered. From the direction of the dragon claw rocks, a cold, precise, and furiously intelligent magical presence awoke. It was a switch being flipped. A silent alarm tripped. Signature X. They were here. Or their wards had screamed. Harry, now. Addie's voice, magically amplified yet thick with strain, ripped through the valley, shattering all stealth. The diverted ley line, unstable without constant guidance, began to thrash. The bypass was collapsing. Raw magic, tainted now by the necromantic binding's backlash, geysered up around the mirror. Harry broke the connection. It was like severing a limb. He staggered, falling to his knees, his senses reeling, the taste of ozone and old blood in his mouth. He fumbled for his portkey. A beam of cold, blue-white light cut through the trees, slicing the night where he had been standing a second before. The air where it passed smelled of nullity and frost. He looked up. A figure stood on the ridge above the mirror, silhouetted against the starless sky. It was of average height, shrouded in robes that seemed to drink the faint light. No face was visible within the deep hood. But the magic radiating from it was unmistakable, the triple-layered signature, now fully unveiled and crackling with fury. The outer layer was a blur of hostile motion, the middle a void that hurt to look at, and the core was a pinpoint of absolute, focused malice. Signature X had arrived. The figure raised a hand. Not a wand. The magic coalesced around its fingers, forming a complex, three-dimensional rune in the air, a spell Harry had never seen, that felt like a closing fist around his heart. He didn't think. He reacted. He didn't try to match the spell's power. He couldn't. Instead, he did the only thing his uniquely honed instincts told him to do. He became the valley. He threw his magic not as a shield or a bolt, but as a camouflage. He wrapped himself in the screaming feedback of the disrupted ley line, in the shrieking pain of Karis's rebound spirit, in the chaotic, panicked magic of Addie's fleeing presence. He didn't hide his signature, he dissolved it into the background noise of the catastrophic event they had just triggered. For a second, the targeting rune from the figure wavered, its focus confused by the sudden riot of magical chaos. That second was all Addie needed. A stunning spell, brilliant orange and powerful enough to fell a giant, shot from her position, striking the ground at the figure's feet, sending shards of rock and earth into the air. The figure, X, flashed out of existence, apparating with a soundless crack to a new vantage point, the spell already reforming. Go! Addie screamed again. Harry's fingers closed on the portkey, a bent spoon. He activated it. The hook behind his navel yanked him backwards into the whirlwind. The last thing he saw was the valley consumed in a storm of conflicting magics, the raging green of the mirror, the cold blue searchlight of X's gaze sweeping the trees, and the fading orange echo of Addie's defiance. Then, noise, color, pressure. He was spat out onto the cold, damp cobbles of a dark London alley miles from the shop. He collapsed, retching, his body trembling with magical exhaustion and shock. He had held a ley line. He had spoken to a ghost. He had faced the monster. And he had failed. Karis was still bound. They had revealed their hand. And Signature X now knew it had a new, persistent enemy. But as he lay there, gasping, the ghost voice echoed in the vault of his memory, clear as a bell. The tallest claw, the heart stone, it drinks the pain. They hadn't freed her. But she had given them a weapon. The source of the binding. The physical anchor. The ley line gambit had been a desperate, costly failure. But it had also been the first, real shot in a war that had just escalated from a shadow game to a fight for survival. Harry pushed himself to his hands and knees, his vision swimming. He had to get back. He had to find Addie. He had to know she was safe. And then, they had a heart stone to find, and a monster to drag, kicking and screaming, into the light. Chapter 15, The Heart Stone. The knock on the door of Obscurus Books, 3 days after the catastrophe in Wales, was not the soft tap of a customer. It was a firm, percussive rat-a-tat-tat that vibrated through the wards and settled like a stone in Harry's stomach. He and Addie froze in the back room, the remains of a silent, strained breakfast between them. Addie's face was drawn, the purple streaks in her hair looking like bruises against her pallor. Harry felt hollowed out, scraped raw from the inside. The ghost echo of Karis's rebound torment was a constant, cold whisper in his nerves, and the memory of Signature X's unveiled malice was a fresh brand on his mind. They had made it back separately, Addie appearing an hour after him, her robe cinched and her eyes wild with a fear Harry had never seen in her. The shop's wards had been reinforced to a suffocating degree. They had not spoken of the failure, only of survival. The unspoken question hung between them: did they follow you? Now, the knock seemed to answer. Addie rose, her wand appearing in her hand from a hidden sleeve. She moved to the shop front, Harry a silent shadow behind her, his own magic pulled tight and ready to become anyone, anything, to disappear. She peered through the one-way enchantment on the door. Her body went rigid, then, oddly, relaxed a fraction. Not with relief, but with a kind of weary recognition. It's not them, she murmured. It's an old problem. She opened the door a crack. On the step stood a wizard, but unlike any ministry official. He was tall and rake-thin, dressed in robes of a fine but travel-stained material. His hair was long and silver, tied back, and his face was handsome in a sharp, austere way, though deep lines of exhaustion and sorrow were carved around his mouth and eyes. He carried an air of faded nobility and immense, contained grief. Adelaide, the man said, his voice a low, cultured baritone, edged with a desperation he couldn't quite hide. Lucian, Addie replied, her voice cool. This is not a good time. I have nowhere else to go. The man, Lucian, glanced over his shoulder, his movements quick, furtive. They are closing in. The whispers, they've started again. About the valley. About the old bindings. I think he's checking his work. The word hung in the air. Addie's eyes met Harry's for a fraction of a second. She stepped back, opening the door wider. Inside. Quickly. Lucian slipped in, bringing with him the scent of frost and fear. His eyes, a tired gray, swept the cluttered shop and landed on Harry. They held no recognition, only a flicker of vague surprise at a boy's presence. "My great-nephew, Harold," Addie said briskly, the lie smooth as old silk. "Harold, this is Lucian, an old acquaintance. A historian." Lucian gave a short, distracted nod. "Adelaide, you must listen. The artifact we spoke of, years ago. The theoretical anchor for a cauldron-born binding. I believe it's not theoretical. I believe it exists. And I believe I know who used it." In the back room, over tea that grew cold, Lucian's story spilled out. He was Lucian Folly, a distant cousin of Addie's from a minor branch of the family, a scholar specializing in obscure, dark magical artifacts. Years ago, during the war, he had been approached by a man he knew only as the Architect, a brilliant, reclusive theorist with ties to the Death Eaters but, Lucian believed, loyal only to his own research into immortality and power amplification. The Architect had been fascinated by Lucian's work on soul anchors and leyline manipulation. He wanted to know how to tether a magical sacrifice to a place of power permanently, Lucian said, his hands trembling around his cup. To create a perpetual well of amplified magic, fed by suffering. I refused to give him the details. I thought that was the end of it. He looked up, his eyes haunted. "My wife, Alara, she vanished 6 months later. From a place near a known ley line convergence. There was no sign of a struggle. Just, gone. The ministry called it a voluntary disappearance. I knew it wasn't. He had spent years searching, following whispers, patterns of missing magical folk near convergence points. He'd compiled his own, private map of sorrow, which he now spread on the table. It was a messier, more emotional version of Harry and Addie's own work, but the correlation was undeniable. And at the center of several clusters was the Welsh Valley. "The Architect," Lucian whispered. "His signature, I felt it once, by accident. It was like nothing else. Layered, cold, a void at its heart. I think he perfected the ritual without me. I think he took Alara. I think he took them all. And he's been using them too, to fuel something. For years." Harry listened, his blood turning to ice. The Architect. Signature X had a name, a history. And a motive that was worse than political ideology. It was cold, academic evil. A man experimenting with souls. "Why come to me now?" Addie asked, her voice tight. "Because the whispers say there was a disturbance in the Valley of Veils," Lucian said, his gaze sharpening. "A failed attempt to disrupt a binding. Someone else is looking. Someone who got close enough to trigger his alarms. If you know anything, Adelaide, if you've heard anything, it could be a way to find him. To find Alara. To stop this." Addie and Harry exchanged another look. The decision was silent, instantaneous. They could not trust Lucian fully. His grief was real, but so was his potential as a liability. Yet, he had information they lacked, a name, a possible identity for the Architect. And he was another target of the same monster. "We know of the valley," Addie admitted cautiously. "We have felt the binding. We attempted to communicate with the spirit there. A woman named Karis." Lucian's breath hitched. "Karis ap Bryn. The Water Witch. She was the first, I think. The prototype." He leaned forward, a desperate hope kindling in his eyes. "You spoke to her. Did she say anything?" Harry spoke for the first time, his voice quiet. "She said, the tallest claw. The heart stone. It drinks the pain." Lucian's face went ashen, then flushed with a terrible excitement. "The anchor. Of course. A physical focus within the convergence point itself. Not just magical, but material. If we can find it, destroy it. It would shatter the binding," Addie finished. "Free the spirit. And it would be a direct blow to the Architect's work. It might even draw him out. Or send him deeper into hiding," Harry countered, the strategist in him warring with the part that wanted to smash the heart stone to dust immediately. "It's a risk," Lucian agreed. "But it's the only lead I've had in years. I have to try. With or without you." He was a man with nothing left to lose. Harry understood that look. He'd seen it in his own reflection. An alliance, fragile and fraught with danger, was forged that afternoon. They pooled their knowledge. Lucian provided theories on the possible composition of a heartstone, likely basalt or obsidian, infused with sacrificial blood and etched with permanent runes of consumption. He also had a list of the Architect's suspected former haunts, abandoned laboratories, forgotten manor houses. Harry and Addie provided the precise magical topography of the valley, the signature data, and Harry's unique skills. The plan was simple, and therefore terrifying. They would return to the valley. Not to manipulate ley lines, but for a surgical strike. Lucian, with his knowledge of artifact magics, would locate the physical heart stone within the tallest dragon claw rock. Harry, using his abilities, would get inside the warded formation to retrieve or destroy it. Addie would provide overwatch and a diversion if needed. It was a suicide mission. The architect's wards would be at their most sensitive. He would be expecting another attempt. We go at dawn, 2 days from now, Addie decided. The veil is thinnest then, but the residual magical turbulence from our last attempt should also be at a cyclical low. It might give us a sliver of advantage. The 2 days were a torture of preparation and silent dread. Harry practiced a new disguise, not a person, but a thing. A piece of the valley. He learned to mimic the magical signature of the lichen on the rocks, the slow, patient pulse of the earth itself, layered over his own null field. He became a walking piece of scenery. It was the most draining, conceptually difficult transformation he'd ever attempted, leaving him with a persistent, low-grade headache. Lucian proved his worth, enchanting 3 amulets that would, in theory, harmonize their wearers with the specific necromantic frequency of the binding, allowing them to pass through its peripheral wards without triggering a full alert. The night before the return, Harry couldn't sleep. He sat in the loft, stroking Ember, who had been quietly, insistently affectionate since his return. He looked at the map of Britain, now dotted not just with pins, but with names. Karis, Alara, Caradoc, Edgar, so many others. He wasn't doing this for revenge, or for glory, or even just for survival anymore. He was doing it for them. The lost, the used, the forgotten. At dawn, under a sky the color of a fresh bruise, the 3 of them stood in the alley behind the shop. No grand speeches. Addie checked the amulets. Lucian clutched a delicate, silver pendulum that would point to concentrated soul magic. Harry took a deep breath, feeling the valley disguise settle over him like a second skin of stone and cold moss. They apparated with a series of soft cracks. The valley was different. The silence was no longer passive, it was hunted. The air was sharp with the aftertaste of their previous magical violence and the sharper, cleaner scent of reinforced, hostile wards. The dragon claw rocks seemed to lean in, watching. Lucian's pendulum swung unerringly towards the tallest spike. They moved like ghosts, following the harmonizing pull of their amulets. Harry could feel the binding's presence, a sick, pulsing toothache in the world. Karis was at the mirror, her green glow subdued, as if exhausted from the recent disruption. They reached the base of the towering rock. Up close, it was seamed with deep, shadowed cracks. Lucian held his pendulum to one. It quivered, then pointed straight into the darkness. Here, he breathed. The cavity is within. The wards, they are intricate, keyed to the architect's signature and to the pain frequency of the binding. No one else can pass. Harry looked at the crack. It was narrow, barely wide enough for a child. For him. He glanced at Addie. Her face was a mask of fear and pride. She nodded. He didn't transform. He shrunk. A partial, painful metamorphosis, compressing his bones, thinning his body, becoming a lean, agile creature built for cracks and darkness. He kept his human mind, his magic tightly sheathed in the valley disguise. He slipped into the stone. The inside was not natural. A smooth, vertical shaft had been bored by magic. It was utterly dark, and the air was thick with the smell of ozone and a coppery tang, old blood and spent power. The walls hummed with oppressive, complex wards. His amulet grew warm against his chest, singing its harmonizing note. The wards sensed the note, hesitated, and let him pass, a single, permissible anomaly in their design. He climbed down for what felt like an eternity. Finally, the shaft opened into a small, spherical chamber. In the center, on a pedestal of the same black rock, it sat. The heart stone. It was a lump of polished obsidian, about the size of his fist. It was not inert. It pulsed with a slow, rhythmic light, a deep, Venus purple that throbbed in time with the ache of the binding. Etched across its surface were runes that seemed to swim when he looked at them, drinking in the faint light from his amulet. And within the stone's depths, shadows swirled, not mere darkness, but tiny, silent, screaming faces. Karis's elegant features. A woman he assumed was Alara, kind-eyed. Others, strangers, all trapped in a silent chorus of agony. It drinks the pain. Revulsion and fury warred in him. This was it. The source. The engine of centuries of torment. He reached for it. As his fingers closed around the cold, pulsating stone, the world exploded. Not physically. Magically. The harmonizing note of his amulet shattered. The wards, recognizing an unauthorized touch on their core, screamed. A silent, psychic shriek of violation echoed through the ley line, through the binding, out into the valley. Outside, he heard Addie shout, a spell crack, and Lucien's cry of alarm. The hard stone fought him. It wasn't just heavy, it felt anchored to the world, its roots sunk into the ley line, into the suffering of the bound spirits. Trying to pull it free was like trying to uproot a mountain with his bare hands. The pain faces within swirled faster, their silent screams battering at his mind. He couldn't pull it, so he did the only other thing he could think of. He focused not on his own magic, but on the connection he had forged with Karis. On the echo of her surprise, her momentary clarity. He poured that memory, that fragile sense of recognition, into the stone. Not an attack, but a message. A reminder. You are Karis. You are Alara. You are someone. This stone is not your heart. Asterisk. For a second, the pulsing purple light faltered. The swirling faces stilled, their expressions shifting from agony to confusion, to a dawning, terrible awareness. In that second of collective, shocked sentience, the anchor's hold on the ley line slipped. Harry wrenched the heart stone from the pedestal. The effect was instantaneous and cataclysmic. The entire chamber shook. The humming in the walls rose to a deafening shriek and then cut off abruptly. From above, he heard a sound like 1,000 panes of glass breaking, the sound of the binding around the mirror shattering. He didn't wait. He shoved the horrifying, now quiescent stone into a lead-lined pouch Addie had given him and scrambled back up the shaft as the rock around him groaned in protest. He burst out of the crack into chaos. The valley was no longer silent. It was filled with a rushing, sighing sound, like a great breath being released. The green glow over the mirror was gone. In its place, a soft, silver mist was rising, and within it, faint, smiling figures, dozens of them, were dissipating, their forms peaceful, fading into the dawn light. Karis, for a fleeting moment, looked directly at him. Her lips formed two silent words, "Thank you." Asterisk. Then she, and all the others, were gone. Finally free. But the victory was not complete. On the ridge above, silhouetted against the brightening sky, stood the shrouded figure. The architect. Signature X. He was utterly still, but the rage emanating from him was a physical force, bending the light around him into a cold, blue halo. He had felt his masterpiece destroyed. He had come to see the destroyers. His hooded head turned, not towards Addie or Lucian, who were staring, stunned, at the freeing spirits. He looked directly at Harry, who stood covered in rock dust, the lead pouch heavy in his hand. The figure raised a hand. No wand. The same complex, murderous rune began to form in the air, faster this time, final. Harry was exhausted, magically spent. He had no disguise that could fool this focused hatred. He had no strength for a duel. He did the only thing left. He looked the architect in the place where his face should be, and he let his own disguise, the valley, the stone, the nullity, fall away completely. For the first time in years, in the heart of a breaking dawn, Harry Potter stood revealed. Not as a legend, not as a fugitive, not as a collection of masks. Just as a boy. A tired, determined, furious boy with a lightning bolt scar on his forehead and a stolen heart stone in his hand. The forming rune hesitated. For a fraction of a second, the cold, intelligent malice wavered, replaced by something else, shock. Recognition. Incredulity. In that frozen sliver of time, Addie's voice, raw with power and terror, cut through the valley. Protega horribilis. A dome of shimmering, golden light erupted around Harry, just as the architect's spell lanced out. The killing curse, or something like it, smashed against Addie's shield with a sound that broke the sky. The shield held, but spider-webbed with cracks, and Addie was thrown backwards, crashing into Lucian. The architect didn't fire again. He stared at Harry through the cracking golden light, at the face he had not seen since it was a baby's, a face that was supposed to be hidden, docile, forgotten. Then, with a soundless, furious twist of space, he vanished. The valley was suddenly, utterly quiet. The mist was dissipating. The sun broke over the ridge, painting the freed land in golden pink. Harry stood, trembling, the scar on his forehead burning as it hadn't since the night in the cupboard. He was free. Karis was free. But he was also seen. The boy who lived had just declared war on a monster from the shadows. And the monster now knew his face. As Addie groaned, pushing herself up, and Lucian stared in wonder at the peaceful, empty mirror, Harry looked down at the lead pouch. The war wasn't over. It had just found its true battlefield. He had a heartstone full of secrets. And he had an enemy who knew who he was. The game of shadows was over. Now, it was a hunt. And for the first time, Harry was no longer the prey hiding in the dark. He was the hunter, standing in the light of a new day, with a name to find, a debt to settle, and a world to protect, on his own terms.